All right, so do me a favor. Tell me where can everybody find your work? Where are you the most active at? What's your Twitter? And if other documentary people are interested in documentaries, especially in the medical space, how do they contact you and go about that?
So my name is Eric Merola. Web address is easy, ericmerola.com. And so I have buttons for every one of my movies through the YouTube links right there on the front page. If you're interested in the fetal stem cell part of it, while you can find it through ericmerola.com, I have stemcellsmovie.com. I somehow managed to grab that domain. But that's really, those are the two ones. As far as like seeing my work, you can see it's all centrally located at ericmerola.com.
Yep.
I was booted off of Twitter, so I don't have a Twitter account. And I honestly, and I will eventually reopen one. But what's interesting is the Twitter people weren't really fans of my work. It's interesting. I opened up Twitter accounts even for stem cells, and they don't seem to engage with Twitter, so I just kind of left Twitter alone. And they don't even really engage with social media at all, really. A lot of people just either stumble upon it accidentally, well, actually most of them do, and then when they contact me, it's just eric at ericmerola.com. They just see the email, and it's very simple, Yeah. So,
Perfect.
But as far as other documentaries in the medical space, we're kind of inundated now. I mean, they're everywhere. And at the time, like I said, I think I was the first ever to do it. And so much so that even people that believed in what I was doing, they just said, Eric, you're gonna fail miserably at this. Like, there's no way you're gonna get anywhere with this. And they were all completely surprised when it exploded. It's like, and I think I honestly created a genre. Like there was no medical documentaries that bucked up against the system until after I released mine. I swear to God, I didn't design that. But if you look back at that time period in 2010, look for any other medical documentary, you can't find one. It's fascinating. Now they're everywhere, I've been making documentary films since my first one was released in 2010. And so about 15 years of my life has just been exclusively documentary film work. I guess I can call myself an investigative journalist, but I love diving into things that involve like innovative technologies. And so the first many movies I've done had to do with innovative medical inventions that the industry was not so happy about. Like a great side example, Kodak invented the digital camera, but of course they didn't allow that to really reach the market, and of course that blew up in their face. But when it comes to medicine, it's a much more complicated thing because the regulatory agencies are sort of working hand in hand with the industry itself. And so when you have, say, something like a treatment for cancer or like a stem cell therapy that can reverse neurological conditions, and any invention in medicine that could potentially disrupt or damage the bottom line of the pharmaceutical industry and the medical industry as a whole, that just fascinated me. I've always been interested in disruptive technologies, like something as simple. When I was a kid, I was fascinated between the transition, like say in warfare, for example. Not that I'm a fan of war, but like the bow and arrow to the sword to the gun. The people that had the guns completely dominated.
Yep.
And then you go from the horse and carriage to the automobile. And like the first automobile came out in the late 1800s, and they forced everybody that drove one to have a guy in front of the car carrying a red flag because they thought this is the most dangerous thing ever. Not to mention that the people looked at the automobile and said, where do you connect the horse? It was such a confusing time. Electricity was considered voodoo magic back in the day, So, but when you fast forward to medicine, that's a fascinating, exploration when you disrupt something like that. And of course, I think how you and I met was I did something totally out of my usual wheelhouse, and I went into the banking system. And not that this story was disruptive so much in its underpinnings of the story, but it also interested me because of the rise of, like, say, Bitcoin, a decentralized currency with no central party responsible. Like, I looked at the story and went, wow, like if the people that had their money in this bank or had the money didn't put it into this bank that was blown up, metaphorically, and they had it in, say, Bitcoin or even a stable currency, they would have been sheltered from it, which attracted me to that. So that's, in a short nutshell, kind of what I've spent the last 15 years doing.
So what was your very first film that you did?
Burzynski, a very complicated name. I decided to name it after the scientist and doctor who the story was about, a guy named Dr. Stanislaw Burzynski. And in short, he came from communist Poland. He discovered a strain of peptides that had never been discovered before in medical history.
What's a peptide?
A peptide, it's like amino acids. It's just a part of, we all have peptides.
Okay.
I can get on it.
No, that's good. I just want our audience to have an idea.
Well, just imagine, like, one guy put it the best. Like, Burzynski was getting his PhD in biochemistry after getting his medical degree in Poland, and he found a strain of peptides back in Poland that had never been discovered before. And as one guy put it, it's like finding a bunch of new islands off the coast of Miami. You're like, how could we have not ever seen this before? And he didn't really know what it meant, but he had, like any curious scientist, he knew it meant something. So fast forward, he escaped communist Poland. And by the way, the Communist Party tried to reel him in. This was the late 60s, early 70s. Like we've heard stories about the Communist Party where if you're a superstar, they want you to be, especially if you were born and raised in a communist society. So he just kept refusing to be a part of the party. And so they kept sending him to like these Arctic mountains, to like be in a tent and, working for, just they tortured him, metaphorically, and just like harassed him. And he finally escaped with like $20 in his pocket. He was only allowed something like $5 American to leave with, and he shoved the other 15 in his crotch. And he goes to the Bronx, stays with a distant relative, and long story short, he ends up getting a job at Baylor College of Medicine in Texas by presenting his peptides, and they were very interested in it. So he got barely speaking English at the time, he got a job as like a professor, but it was sort of like smokescreen for, let's bring this guy in. By the early 70s, then he realized, holy crap, this is something that could be potentially effective against cancer. Not a magic bullet cure, but this is certainly something that could slow down cancer. So all these like mouse studies, the usual routes were being conducted. The National Cancer Institute caught wind of it. And by 74-ish, they offered to buy it from him. The National Cancer Institute of the United States. And he said no, because you got to think about it. Like this guy came from communist Poland. Like he didn't trust the governments anyway. And he was just kind of his personality anyway, just very strong-headed. It's his invention. I'm not going to just sell it. Just Fast forward, by the late 70s, he realized, after developing it, he realized that since he was in Texas, and by that point he had become an American citizen, blah, blah, blah. If you were a resident of Texas that who was a medical doctor at the time, and you had an invention that was a medical invention, and you had terminal patients that were coming to you, and in this case cancer, you were allowed to give your experimental medication inside the state of Texas as long as it did not cross state lines. Because if it stayed in Texas, it didn't break federal regulations. So he opened up like a clinic at the equivalent of like next door to a laundromat in a strip mall. All of these terminal cancer patients were going to him as a last resort. Imagine you're dying from terminal cancer in the late 70s or around 1980. You're going to go to a guy that barely speaks English who has this invention. And it turns out, as a side note, the invention is quite difficult to administer. You put a port in your chest, you have this mechanical battery-powered pump hanging from you like a purse, and it's pumping this medication into you. Two IBV bags a day of this. There's two different types that he mixed together. And so anyway, he started curing people left and right. Not a magic bullet. And it wasn't until he started curing people and the word got out, people were traveling from all over the United States, California, Washington State, Virginia. And then they'd have to stay on the medication because you'd have to stay on it for sometimes up to a year, especially in the really severe cancer cases. So, of course, they go back home with the medication, cross the state lines, everything blows up in his face. And so the Texas State Medical Board tried to take his medical license away on the state level first, even before he got into federal trouble. And then the FDA went after him twice. Two sets of jury this spilled into the 90s. So it ramped up in the 80s as far as the state and federal governments trying to take him down. And by the time the mid-90s rolled around, two sets of federal trials at the federal court in Austin, Texas, of the FDA tried to not only stop him from what he was doing, but put him in prison for some 300 years because they did the usual, mail fraud, because they were shipping medicine, interstate commerce, okay. And anyway, the maximum sentence was like 300 and some years. And they weren't allowed in the case. This is why I wanted to do the story, because I didn't find out about the story until the 2000s. So a lot of this had already occurred. The story was just sitting there. So they weren't allowed. The defense was not allowed to bring in whether or not the therapy worked, which is just hilarious, right? Because that's the whole point of this argument.
Yes.
It was all about the breaking of the laws, interstate commerce, mail fraud, et cetera. So inevitably, when they brought witnesses to the stand, every patient was like, "Yeah, he cured my cancer." So Yes, I had to get the medicine because my cancer was going away. Of course I accepted this interstate, anyway.
Yep.
And so long story short, 2 sets of jury trials said not guilty. So the first set of jury trials let him go, not guilty. FDA takes him back to court again within a year. The jurors from the first trial protested the second trial because they couldn't believe how absurd this was. And they were in Congress in like 96, screaming and yelling. What's just interesting is like all the right-wing kind of side of politics supported him, sort of the libertarian types. And all the left wings wanted to take him down. It was a really interesting thing to watch in Congress. Not that I'm very agnostic politically, but it was an interesting thing that also added to it all, to see this. So you had, I can't remember the names of the people now, but it's in the movie. But so you had all of that. And then I realized that once that had been finished, he's operating still. He's still operating in Houston, Texas, and even is to this day in the year 2025. So long story short, so I didn't have a lot of documentary experience. I'd worked on films, kind of PBS specials and whatever in post-production sense. And I knew I was very unhappy in my days of advertising. I was working on Madison Avenue as a creative because it was very lucrative, even though this wasn't what I wanted to be doing the rest of my life. So I'd call in sick to work, charge up credit card debt, and so Burzynski didn't trust me at first because I had no documentary credentials, and as everything I said, why would he trust me?
Yep.
So I said, okay, well, can you at least do this? Are there any of your patients willing to talk to me? And so I said, I only want to speak to people that have never touched chemotherapy or radiation. I had a verified biopsy that verified their diagnosis and only had your therapy. So he gave me a handful. So I found one woman with a brain tumor, terminal brain cancer, who was cured by him. She was an adult. She was, I guess, at the time around 30 at the time. She's now still alive with kids, family. Wow. I found a 7-year-old with stage 4 kidney cancer. He completely cured because the reasons the parents wanted his therapy was because the chemotherapy regimen would have killed the kid anyway, because it would have given so many side illnesses that would have threatened the kid's life, not to mention brain damage that could happen to a kid with chemotherapy. And then the third one, I said it's a bunch of them, but I included 3. The point is they never touched traditional therapy. So I made a little 30-minute edit, showed it to Burzynski, and he was like, okay, this guy clearly is on my side here. So anyway, I made the movie thinking YouTube had just gotten started. And I thought, at least it's something that I care about. I'll throw it up on YouTube. It's this new thing, But it ended up being like this smash hit, and it ended up getting into all these film festivals. I ended up getting it reviewed by like Variety and the LA Times and all these like very mainstream media outlets. And by the way, I feel confident in just saying that I'm the first guy that ever opened up this genre. There wasn't any medical documentaries like this where you covered an invention, especially cancer, where the government tries to take it down.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And not only do they try to take it down, like in the movie, it's been so many years, the National Cancer Institute rears its ugly head again and says, oh, okay, let's make clinical trials again for your therapy. The National Cancer Institute rigs the trials to fail, all documented. This is in the movie. And one of the lead investigators in the National Cancer Institute was a former Burzynski scientist that they recruited and paid off to join them. And then they joined with her to patent in a different way, because they tried to alter the sequences, and patent his own invention while the same government that runs the National Cancer Institute was trying to throw the guy in prison. It's just like the most insane story ever.
Who did you say rigged that trial?
The National Cancer Institute. The America's National, as a part of the NIH.
The NIH.
Yeah. It's in the documentary, very well documented, because Burzynski was a pack rat, and he saved all the communication. That was before digital communication. So everything was printouts, faxes, and he also had eventually some moles that started leaking stuff to him, because people eventually realized within the NCI that, holy shit, this guy has a treatment for cancer that's non-toxic. It may not be a magic bullet, but it sure beats chemotherapy and radiation, and especially when you're told chemotherapy and radiation is never going to cure you, like in the case of a brain tumor. Great example, glioblastoma. Ted Kennedy died of this. John McCain died of this. Somebody recently, I think one of the famous musicians, just got diagnosed with it. You do not live through this. No one lives through this. Burzynski has been curing them like 35% of the time. It's very, very real. So anyway, it blew up. It I was able to quit my job. People bought DVDs back then.
Yep.
So I was able to I'm the guy selling DVDs. I didn't have a distributor, so I would just honestly send them myself. I even had my father, who was a retired postal worker, mail them for me. It was a really exciting time. And I spent all that money on Burzynski Part 2 because I was in a position where, okay, this movie's popular. It tells the historical story. And all these cancer patients are emailing me, going, I Judah saw your movie, blah, blah, blah. And so I said, I'm in a great position to do a sequel. Why don't I, this time, follow cancer patients before they get the therapy, getting the therapy, and see where they go. And the patients that I chose were primarily brain cancer patients because he had a great track record with brain cancer patients, not because it's better for brain cancer, but because it's usually a death sentence. And so it's like, what else are you going to do?
Yep.
So let's go try this, Polish guy's therapy. Anti-neoplastons is the name of it, which basically just means anti-cancer. Anyway, so half of them lived and half of them died by the end of the documentary, or by the time I released it, and I was very honest about that and showed that. And a lot of other people came out of the woodwork by that time that I was able to, because when you have a movie come out, you only have so many resources as far as people that you know, and then suddenly the waterfalls come in as far as, oh, I was a part of this back then.
Yep.
And so then the third one, because I was sort of in that whole cancer genre, if you would.
Yep.
The third one, which was actually the original movie I wanted to do, called Second Opinion. The first one's called Burzynski. The second one's Burzynski, Cancer is Serious Business Part 2. The third one is called Second Opinion, Laetrile at Sloan-Kettering. This is a story, again, cancer, that I had read a book called The Cancer Industry, living in New York. And these long train rides home from working late hours on Madison Avenue, I always wanted to read. You had no internet reception down there. And plus, this is like in the 90s anyway. In the early mid-2000s anyway. And I always liked reading. Out the time passed. So I bought this book for like $1 at this used bookstore called The Strand in Manhattan, called The Cancer Industry. And I said, well, that's interesting. And I read the back. I was like, $1. I'll check it out. What do I have to lose? And that's what turned me onto this whole world. So it's a story about how this assistant public relations director of Sloan-Kettering Cancer Center in New York City, the biggest cancer center in the world at the time, and still one of the biggest, in the country at the time, but still one of the biggest in the country and the world. The people that ran Sloan-Kettering worked alongside with Nixon's war on cancer campaign. Like this was like the pinnacle of America's cancer industry, or searching for the cancer cure, if you would. At the time, there was something called Laetrile, otherwise known as amygdalin, and it's a derivative. It's laughable, honestly, if you think about it. It's a derivative of of a waste product of the California's apricot canning industry. If you open up an apricot, or kind of like a peach, and you break open that little chunky pit, there's a little almond looking thing inside. And somehow somebody figured this out back in the 60s, leading into the 70s, that if you process this and inject it, it might help with cancer. Now, to fast forward, a lot of people maybe watching this are eating apricot pits, and I'm sad to tell you that it doesn't do anything because your stomach acids destroy the mechanism of action. It has to be injected. It has to be processed into liquid form and injected into your bloodstream to get this effect. I just want to get this off the table now. So everybody was going to Mexico to get Laetrile, like 75,000 people a year. And so Sloan-Kettering, being the biggest cancer center in the country and helping Nixon start the war on cancer, they were like, well, we have no choice. We have to test this, right? So they get this guy who was an old Japanese scientist who was one of the original inventors of chemotherapy. He was like in his 80s. His name was Kamanatu Sigura. And this guy was considered so important to the cancer sort of research field that when the Japan bombed Pearl Harbor in the 40s, they hid this guy in the Bronx. Sloan-Kettering wasn't called that back then. It was like Memorial Hospital of something. Like he was considered that important. And he went later on invented chemotherapy. And he was the first guy to ever even use mice to test chemotherapeutic agents. This was a superstar in the cancer research field. He would take big buckets, like plastic buckets, and like catch mice in the basement of the hospital and drag them up to his lab and test new chemotherapeutic agents he was working on. This was a superstar of the cancer research field. So they go, and he was in retirement, but he loved his job so much by the time they wanted to test Laetrile or amygdalin. So they hand him the job. And so he tested it in every mouse model he could find. And what that means is when you test in any new chemical testing of medicine, when you start in mice, there are certain breeders that breed mice to have certain ailments like diabetes or in this case cancer. And so there's all these mouse breeders that were breeding mice to develop spontaneous breast cancer, memory tumors. So he would test it in the first mouse model. 80% of the time it stopped the spread of cancer. Didn't touch the tumors, but it stopped it from spreading. Second mouse model, 80% of the time stopped the spread of tumors, one after another, like a dozen of these. Then he goes, I wonder if it will prevent cancer. Let's get some of these mice in different mouse models that are bred to develop cancer. Almost none of them got cancer. So here's this byproduct of the apricot canning industry that's just thrown in the garbage. That's mildly, it doesn't take a lot of work to create it. And by the way, the Japanese researcher, he purchased his Laetrile or amygdalin from the same Mexican manufacturers that were giving it to patients in Mexico. So like, it's the same stuff, okay? And so once they realized what he had done, they realized they needed to cover it up. But it was a really interesting story of how it happened because this guy, Ralph Moss, he had like a PhD in classics. He was just like a literature guy, and he was a good writer. He was not a science guy. When he was working for Sloan-Kettering's public relations department. And they gave him the job because they knew Kamanatu Sigura, the researcher, was gonna not live too much longer. He probably had a few more years. But he's a superstar in our field. We want you to meet him and write like a bio on him. Like we want you to like dedicate, something to him because he's crucial to our history. And by the way, he still is. Like he's on the cover of Bristol Myers Squibb Mouse Manual. Like he's all through. He's got a Wikipedia page. It's all there, all his accolades. There's no mention of this story, of course.
Yeah.
So anyway, Ralph meets him, and after the end of his interview, like we're doing, he goes, "So what are you working on today?" And he goes, "I'm working on amygdalin." And Ralph goes, "Amygdalin? Like isn't that Laetrile? Like isn't that like the quack therapy that like why are you working on that? Like garbage basically." And he goes, "Oh, no." And he gets up and he pulls down all his 3-ring binders and starts showing Ralph what I just explained to you. 80% stoppage of metastasis, blah, blah, blah. Oh, it prevented cancer from even happening. And Ralph, can you imagine being him going, holy shit, like what? And he goes back to tell his boss. And his boss was just like, he's like, keep an eye on him. Long story short, Ralph knew the truth. And then this big press conference, which I unearthed. I was the first guy for this movie to unearth this actual press conference where there's only 3 networks, NBC, CBS, and ABC at the time. I can't remember exactly, but one of them had destroyed it, not because of this, but because it was so old. Yeah. So I had to wait like almost 2 months for NBC and I think CBS to dig it out of their basement and then pay to have it digitized, the actual film, into digital so I could use it. And I couldn't believe what I saw. And even Ralph, because it had been so many years when I showed it to him, he was flabbergasted. Because what you saw in the news was a very hatchet job edited version of what really happened. And they even had Sugiura, the Japanese researcher, at the table at the press conference. And he just spills the beans in front of the whole press. Tells everybody the truth. But it never made it to air. So anyway, that's my third movie where I just blew this wide open, even though it was decades later. And the reason I called it Second Opinion is because before Ralph blew the whistle on this entirely, he cleverly made a remember, he was an employee of the company. And this is back in the day where they give you the gold watch at retirement, and they put your children through college. Like this was back in like the height of American corporate, where they take care of their corporate employees. And so he did not want to lose his job, and so he decided to first start leaking the documents. Like he leaked it to the New York Times. They did nothing with it. Then he started creating an underground newsletter called Second Opinion that he distributed. He hired people to distribute it in front of his own company and hand it to all the employees as they came in. And it had all the data. And so that's why I called Second Opinion. So anyway, he failed at that, and then he finally blew the whistle on it because he got nowhere with it. So anyway, so the point is, as I bring this up, is that for the 2014 release, we opened it in New York City in theaters, and we resurrected the Second Opinion newsletter. And it was an open letter from Ralph to his former employees, or to his, whatever you want to call it, to his company, where it had like the open letter on one side, and then it had what the movie was about on the other side, and it said, if you take this Second Opinion, you get a free admission into the theater to see the Second Opinion. Sure enough, a handful of executives showed up. They sat in the back row. They were being totally obnoxious, just like giggling and like, totally sarcastic. When the lights went up after the movie was over, they were just white as a ghost. And I really thought that maybe something would happen from this. Of course, nothing did. Second Opinion, or excuse me, Sloan-Kettering quickly had my entire YouTube channel wiped from existence. I've never had such pushback, and as far as like the world of trying to share information. Yeah. I haven't told this story often. There's this guy named Walter O'Brien. Walter O'Brien is this genius guy. CBS did a show called Scorpion. You ever heard of this?
I think I have.
It's years ago. I met Walter O'Brien at this sort of like entrepreneurial meeting, and while I was working on this. It was sort of, the two were unrelated, the fact that I was at this meeting and this project. But Walter O'Brien explained, it was right when Scorpion premiered on CBS, and he explained that he would cherry pick all of these genius kids all over the world and create this company. And they would like do unusual tasks, right? So I had a direct line with him, and he's like, for X amount of dollars, you could hire us to get started. So I just said, I called him up because I had his number, and I said, Walter, I have this movie. He watched it. He was very humble and actually took the time to watch it. And I said, he said, what's your goals with this? I said, well, I want to try to get Sloan-Kettering to come clean about this. It's okay if they don't want to follow through on this, but they have to at least acknowledge that their own company and their leading researcher at the time found these results. Just get them to like come clean. A couple of days passed and he goes, sorry, I can't take it on because it's a conflict of interest. They'd already hired him.
No.
Yes.
Shit.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't tell me that. He wasn't allowed, but what else could it possibly be? Because he was at the height of his fame at the time. The TV show had just come out. And like, if you have that kind of capital and resources, why not hire Walter O'Brien to try to see if... And maybe he's the one that took me down. I have no idea as far as the movie,
Yeah.
But, so that's my third movie. And by that point, streaming had taken off. And by that point also, these kinds of movies were not allowed on Netflix anymore. It was on Amazon Prime, Second Opinion, for about a year. That was finally taken down. There was an interesting, Wired magazine had worked with whatever these AstroTurf groups are. And it's the same AstroTurf groups that go after RFK, that went after all the controversy during COVID. We don't want
Opposition research
Everybody
firms.
knows all this, right? Yeah. So, but Wired, what's great about, well, not great, but what's hilarious about them is that what they do is they team up with a member of the media, that's usually a naive member of the media that they can manipulate, and then they'll have an article come out at the same time they take their big takedown. So I was like, my three movies, Burzynski 1, 2, and Second Opinion, was like the highlights of this. And of course, Vaxxed was in it, in this article. But what they did is they said, like, it's about time that Amazon and Netflix and everybody stops putting these medical misinformation movies on these platforms. It's completely unfair to the public and misleading the public. Anyway, so once that came out, and of course the journalists reached out to me, before they published it, they wanted to get a comment. And I knew exactly what was happening, but they got everything wrong. They misquoted it. Like, it just shows how lazy they were. Anyway, but at that point, because of the success of those three movies, I got hit by all sides, and it was kind of exhausting because it was fun to have this success and prove myself right that it's a legit story. And why else would they come after you and be so mad at you unless you had something that was actually that occurred?
Yeah, some truth.
Yeah. So then I took a little hiatus, but by that point, because I didn't sell DVDs anymore, I had enough followers, if you would, where I was able to raise money to make new films. So then my fourth one, incredibly, is in many respects more controversial than the first three, where I was exposed to fetal stem cells. And so that's, should I take a pause? You want to get into this?
I definitely, this is one of the most excited to get into.
Okay, good. So I'm going to start again so you can edit it.
Yeah.
After the success of the first three movies, and by the way, because no one bought DVDs, the first movie I made good money on DVDs because it was 2010, 11-ish. The second movie, I still sold some DVDs. It was 2013 when that was released. And I was simultaneously doing Burzynski Part 2 and Second Opinion simultaneously, like parallel. And by the time 2014 rolled around, DVDs were really on their way out. And it's amazing how fast, going back to disruptive technologies, as I started this with, how fast things can be turned on their head. But at that point, I had enough people who believed in what I was doing, and so I could work with a nonprofit in Southern California that legitimately, where I'd say, this is how much money I need for a new movie, and they would put the money into the nonprofit takes their fee, and I get the rest. Anyway, the point is, the guy who introduced me to all of this, one of the people that helped finance this fourth movie, kept saying, I said, okay, look, I need X amount of money to get across the finish line with Second Opinion. He said, I'll help you, but I want you to look into fetal stem cells. And at the time, I didn't even know anything about stem cells. I knew what they were, but I didn't really do a deep dive on this. It's let me back up. There's multiple types of stem cells. There's mesenchymal, or MSC. That's what you get all over the United States. We can probably find a clinic 3 blocks from here that gives them. They have them in Panama. They have them all over the world. There's mesenchymal is either from your blood or your bone marrow. They take it from you or your bone marrow and they process and give it back to you. It's very good for sports injuries and things like that. Can't do anything for organ-based diagnoses, or especially not neurological. Then they eventually got into umbilical mesenchymal. So during birth, they take the umbilical cord. So all it is a 9-month-old mesenchymal versus, in your case, I'm 52. So in my case, if they took my own, they're 52-year-old mesenchymals versus a 9-month-old. Still same result. Can just really help with connective tissue and rebuilding bones and muscle. That's it. There's no heart cells, lung cells, liver cells, or anything like that in mesenchymal cells. Then what fetal gets confused with is something called embryonic. An embryonic cell is a 5-day-old blastocyst where you take a sperm sample and an egg in a petri dish, you let it grow for 5 days, boom, embryo. There's no organs, there's nothing. It's a 5-day-old blastocyst. And by the way, embryonic is extremely dangerous because it hasn't become anything. You take an embryonic cell and stick it into your bloodstream, it could become anything, including teratomas or non-cancerous tumors. It creates a lot of disgusting things. But the reason I would say this is because people confuse embryonic with fetal. That's what I think is very important. Fetal in this case is end of first trimester, 7 to 11 weeks, 7 to 11 week old fetus versus a 5-day-old blastocyst. Embryonic and fetal are very different. So I'm gonna tell you in chronological order. So turns out this guy who lived in Malibu was giving people fetal stem cells in Tijuana. And I was like, okay, I meet the guy. He was a little quirky, and he actually turned out to be this former, he was like the Dr. Oz, like the first Dr. Oz ever, if you would. He was the first TV doctor. He was on the big talk shows nationwide in the late 70s and early 80s as the first television doctor. And then he ended up kind of falling off career-wise, and he ended up being on Geraldo and all of these sort of daytime flashy, dramatic, everything short of Jerry Springer, frankly. Yeah. And then, I can only, because I got to know the guy well, he discovered fetal stem cells and decided this was going to be his future. But the point is that, I'll get right to it. So I went there 12 times. So he was living in Malibu. I live in LA as well. Once a month, he would give fetal stem cells to patients in Tijuana. So I went down there for 12 months in a row, once a month to film patients. And it was this very kind of quirky thing. It was like an old massage parlor. People would sit in recliners and they'd stick the immune cells, they were called, from the liver in the arm, and then they would stick the brain cells in people's abdomen. And I met a lot of patients who did really well on this.
How often were they having to get treatments?
Well, it depends on the patient. I'll get to that.
Okay.
I'll get to that. So, great question. And that's actually a very big part of this as well. I don't want to get too hung up on this because this is just the stepping stone to where it took me. Yeah. But I realized, though, this is 2014 I started. So Second Opinion was released in summer 2014. I started researching this in March 2014. All the way through 2014 into 2015. I met all these people that were going back that just like Burzynski, where I got the diagnoses for cancer, and these people were clearly diagnosed with MS or Parkinson's, or the kid had this or whatever, and they were doing better. But all the new patients were not doing better. And I just, the curious journalist guy, I'm thinking, this is just weird. So I knew there was something off about the guy, but this kind of part of my job is to gain trust and not elude that I understand that there's something off here.
Yeah.
And just because, after all, I also have somebody financing this, right? Because the guy who financed it had witnessed this, a lot of people do well, and he also got it for anti-aging reasons, which is another part of this, for preventative reasons. Long story short, he admits to me, this guy, his name is Dr. William Rader, that he is running out of cells. I'm thinking, but he had told me that he was getting cells from the country of Georgia. I'm thinking, well, if you told me you're getting the cells from the country of Georgia, from voluntary abortions, and you're running out, so something's not adding up. Then he goes, yeah, I'm trying to replicate them on my own. I'm like, okay, I don't know anything about this. And so, long story short, he purchases these chemicals that allegedly you're able to do this. And you're supposed to be able to, when you replicate stem cells, you have to, like machinery, sterility, technicians that know what they're doing. This guy was taking flasks in his kitchen, and I'm not kidding. And he told me this. And I didn't even really understand what this meant. So then, a month later, I go back down. This is the 12th, I think this was the last time I went. One person dies, and almost everybody else ends up in ICU. And I'm thinking, I just was putting two and together. I was like, oh my God, did he just screw up the... And I told the guy financing this, it's like, dude, I am out. I'm walking away from this whole project. I'm out. And of course, you can imagine the drama.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And I was like, I'd spent a year on this. I was like, dude, I'm not touching this. I'm not having anything to do with this. And then truthfully, I didn't really fully understand the technology. I was just kind of like with Burzynski, I was trying to follow people who were sick. There's this other alternative. And, and frankly, the fact that you're taking stem cells from aborted fetuses is quite a interesting topic. Yeah. And to be clear, people are not getting pregnant on purpose to get the fetal material, and it's really important to point that out because, like, when I realized how this is processed, they throw away so much fetal material for so many reasons, whether it be have a virus or bacterial infection, or it's been sitting too long before it's processed. But also, you need multiple fetuses for one therapy. So, like, I mean, even if somebody. It wouldn't even be profitable. That's immediately what people think. Oh, it's going to encourage abortions. No. I started poking around at this point, and I knew that he said he had been to Ukraine, Dr. William Rader. He had mentioned it on several occasions, and that the Ukrainians taught him the methods, Mm-hmm. So there's only one clinic in Ukraine that was called MCell. So I emailed him, and I just say, hey, I've been following this guy, William Rader. I explained kind of what I explained to you. Mm-hmm. And they responded back quite angrily. And they said, don't ever contact us again. We don't want to have anything to do with you or Dr. Rader and blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, okay, something's up. Mm-hmm. So I go report back to the guy who's helped me finance this, or big arguments because he doesn't even know anything about the Ukrainians. Long story short, because I'm just good at what I do, I guess, I get on a Zoom with the Ukrainians. And I explain everything that I just explained to you.
Yep.
And they're still like, no, you're not coming over here. I was like, can I just please film you guys? Can I interview you? They're like, no. I said, well, what if I come over like a paying patient? I've heard, and a lot of patients are telling me, hey, I'm making a documentary about fetal stem cells, and I haven't had it yet because it's very good for anti-aging and preventative reasons. It's extremely safe. Long story short, I fly all the way to Ukraine back in 2016 and get the therapy, and they let me film it. And behind the scenes, like half of the management was like, no way, you're letting people do this. You saw what happened last guy, some guy from LA comes in, that was a member of the media. Yeah. Anyway, and then the other half was when, truthfully, they were like, well, look at his previous work. Like, if this goes well, like, it could really shed a light on what we're doing. Mm-hmm. So you just imagine the drama.
Yep.
So I get the therapy, I film the whole thing. It's in a movie called The God Cells. I admit, I kind of obnoxiously called it The God Cells. I didn't know what else to title the darn thing.
That's a great title.
I didn't know what else to call it. Because in a way, biology, regardless of religion, it's, if God made it biology, this is just doing biological methods and thus doing God's work. Mm-hmm. All right? And anyway, I don't want to get caught up on that too much. I called it The God Cells, a Fetal Stem Cell Journey. So it took me 6 months from there to gain their trust to let me in the lab. So once they got to know me and know what my intentions were, and not to mention, I couldn't believe how well the therapy made me feel. I went in there by default, knowing it was safe, didn't have any clue how good I was going to feel. I didn't have any idea that this was going to give me such a boost emotionally, psychologically, mentally, intellectually, and physically. Like, all my blood work just goes perfect. And like, I'm obviously a very energetic guy and I talk very fast. But at the time of my life, I think a lot of ambitious people can relate. Like, I just imagine, like, if I had a stove with 6 burners on, I always had all these things happening. Once the cells kicked in, I turned off like half of the burners, metaphorically, and I just focused. I don't know how to explain it. It was like I had studied transcendental meditation for a long time without ever doing it, and I became more chill. All from fetal stem cells. Very odd. I don't know. It just did something to my brain. Because after all, I was injected with brain cells, in addition to everything else. So they finally let me into the lab. I'm able to understand the process of it all. I was also able to follow new patients that had not just gone to Mexico. And then I wrapped up the movie in a bow because I was honestly, in many respects, it was everything I could do to salvage this thing. I wanted to at least finish it. You're getting nearly 24 cell types from 24 different organ systems. Brain, lung, liver, kidney, pancreas, intestines. You're getting the endothelial cells, which is responsible for building all your capillaries and blood vessels. The pre-mesenchymal cells, I mentioned mesenchymal earlier, from the bone marrow or the blood. At the end of first trimester, all of your entire immune system, thus bone marrow, thus blood system, starts in the liver between 7 to 11 weeks. So before the bone marrow is completed in the fetal process, you are injected with that. into your system. So it's a very personalized therapy. So that's why I say it's a sliding scale. It's not just one shot. Day one, you get diagnostics. They do a full blood panel on you, way beyond anything you're going to get in the Western part of the world. Urine panel, and then they do an ultrasound of your abdomen to check out your organs. And if you have a neurological condition, for example, they're going to want to see MRIs and things like that. And then based on your age and based on how your blood looks, like whether you have high cholesterol or whether you have poor circulation, or if somebody has, say, type 2 diabetes, my dad had it, for example, they're going to give more of certain cell types than you would give. Like my dad, type 2 diabetes, couldn't feel his feet because of type 2 diabetes. A neuropathy, no circulation. They gave him a huge amount of the endothelial cells, which is the blood vessel creating cells, and much more than they would have given me. And so, by the way, within 2 weeks, his feet were like a baby's bottom, pink and perfect circulation. So, but if you have like Parkinson's or brain damage, and you need like to have the neurological cells put into the spinal fluid, stuff like that, which is called an intrathecal, which is basically an epidural, that can cost a lot more money because it's a whole different, more intense procedure. They even do intracoronaries, which I filmed, where like if you have heart failure or heart disease, just like they put a stent in where they go in through the groin up here, same process, but they inject vials of cardiac cells right into your heart. Like that's much more expensive, for example. So that's what I mean by personalized. So it's not just a one-size-fits-all scenario.
My aunt has a neurological disorder that it's very, very rare, and that nobody's been able to cure it or come up with anything that helps. She has to go get these transfusions every couple of weeks, and I brought this up to my cousin, and they're really interested, and I'm just curious if it was something that would help her.
Possibly, yeah. In fact, just 2 days ago, I got contacted with somebody with an undiagnosed neurological condition. It's interesting. Again, I don't want to give false hope here.
Right.
It depends on age and how long they've had it. It depends on how much degeneration has occurred because of this problem. Because with any degenerative issue, like a neurological issue, or like Parkinson's or MS specifically, if you've been living with it for 10 years versus somebody that's just diagnosed, and you get this therapy, it's much less work for this therapy to regenerate that much damage versus 10 years of damage. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So it's like anything. The earlier the intervention, the better the results. But it doesn't mean, as long as, especially if she could afford it, it's worth a shot.
They can.
It's one of those things where there's so many undiagnosed conditions, especially in the world of neurology, that this therapy has helped, where people have just thrown in the towel, and it's not going to hurt you. If anything, you just spend a lot of time and spend the money, and it doesn't do anything. Worst case happens is it doesn't do anything, and yeah. So anyway, but what's interesting about this invention, going back to innovative technologies again, is that you might think, how on earth would this ever even come to be, and why is it only available in Ukraine, right? This is another thing that fascinated me, and I didn't know this until I met the Ukrainians, and I met one of the only surviving co-founders of the science. They had realized that people had known for a century that during pregnancy, the cells migrate through the womb, out of the womb, and protect the mother host. Makes sense, right? Doesn't it make sense biologically that you? And then actually, to fast forward, I met women who would email me and saw the God cells who had MS, and they said they would go through mild remissions during pregnancy. They're like, it's very interesting. It's like I was like, because of religious reasons, I would never have this therapy, but I want you to know that this science adds up because I was, during my first and second, I almost wanted to get pregnant again so I can have a relief from my MS symptoms. So anyway, these guys knew this, and they'd been around. This is all throughout the literature. It's known the cells leave the womb during pregnancy and protect the mother host. And one of the reasons they knew this is because one of the earliest things was the mother, female, gives birth to a son, male. They found male DNA, like when they would study the cadavers, when people had died decades later, and the brains and the hearts and like the various organs of a female, and they realized too that one woman, they would look back at the medical history. This woman had a congenital heart defect before pregnancy, and she gave birth to her son, and the congenital heart defect was repaired. And oh, by the way, there's male DNA hanging out in her heart. There you go. So these scientists just put A to B together and went, holy crap, maybe we should do this. So in the 80s, these Ukrainians, at the time Soviets, because it was under Soviet rule, were doing this. They just wanted to see if it was going to be rejected first. They started with just the liver because they understood the whole liver graduating into the bone marrow part. And they would test it on every animal model possible, going back to like the Sigura days. Mice. They even tested it in like horses and dogs and cats and pigs. No rejection. So like, at least it's not going to hurt anybody. In the middle of all this, Chernobyl hits in '86. As we all know what happened then. people were dying left and right of bone marrow failure, and people were living off of blood transfusions just to stay alive. And it was such a devastating tragedy that only a bone marrow transplant can cure bone marrow failure, but you need a match. So you need to have the patient find out what blood type and what, whatever bone marrow type they are, and find another person to donate that, and then where it matches. And then you have to bring the patient near death. You have to lower their immune system. It's the most dangerous process ever. Bone marrow transplant, ridiculous. You put them down near death, almost like overloading them with chemotherapy, essentially, and then you implant the bone marrow and then bring them back to life. That's the only treatment that could cure these people. When you have basically everybody in the region dying of this, you're not going to be able to do that. Not to mention you can't even find the match because the patient's is so destroyed. So these two scientists, who were later on the founders of M-Cell, they started approaching first kids. And they would find kids living off of blood transfusions that were at least kind of healthy enough. They were staying alive only because of the transfusions. And they said, hey, we'd like to inject your child with this thing we're working on. And I have one of them in the film, the first guy ever to be treated with this. And by the way, the parents didn't even know at the time, until I met them through Skype at the time, that what the hell was even given to them. It's in the God cells. But anyway, so they inject this kid with fetal liver cells. He got a little better, but after 2 weeks, he wasn't completely better. They go, let's hit him again. After the second round of fetal liver cells, completely wiped out his bone marrow failure, never had a blood transplant, never had therapy in his life ever. He's now married with children. And
what?
Yes. And they did this a lot. And so the Ukraine Ministry of Health witnessed this, and they said, okay, well, we obviously have to allow this through. So one of the scientists, one was like kind of the scientific brains behind it, they both were, but the other one was really good with bureaucracy. So the other guy, his name is one was named Smigadoop, and the other was named Karpenko. Karpenko gets a job at the Ministry of Health, goes through the bureaucratic process to get it properly run through and legalized in Ukraine, and that's the only reason why it's legal in Ukraine and nowhere else in the world. That's sort of the backstory.
Wow,
I know,
man.
I know.
Holy shit.
So anyway, yeah. So I went on. So after that, I did the Andorra Hustle, which we'll talk about. And then while working on the Andorra Hustle, I did the true Ukrainian fetal stem cell story called Ukraine Fetal Stem Cell Pioneers. So because I felt like the God cells, because I was still wrapping my head around it all, wasn't enough. I needed to do a genuine, and in a way, I even from the time of filming the God cells in Ukraine, I used a lot of footage that I didn't use for the God cells or had time for. So really, Ukraine Fetal Stem Cell Pioneers covers a span of 2015 all the way to 2023. It was like the longest, it's like 8 years of my life that is in one documentary, So, and I felt like the subject matter deserved it, and yeah.
And when is that film out?
That came out in 2023.
In 2023?
Yeah.
And how'd that one do?
Good. I mean, it's on YouTube, but it's interesting. All my success with my first three, once I got into fetal stem cells, a lot of my fans were totally disappointed because of the topic. And then all of the people that helped promote me, I had everybody during those first three movies, like Russell Brand and Tony Robbins, and all these people promoting me on Twitter, saying, you got to see this movie. And other sort of people that are sympathetic in the alternative health world that have huge followers, big fans of mine, movie 1, 2, 3. I started doing fetal stem cells. They were like, nope, cannot touch this. Even some of them said, I will probably go get this therapy. I'm going to get my mom to go get it, but I can't talk about it publicly. And of course, I said, why? I said, well, it's going to anger 50% of my audience.
Abortions.
Yeah, so. But I still stayed true and didn't let that bother me. But to answer your question, it did well in the sense, but nothing like my first three. And I think when I say it did well, it's because I've seen it help so many people, because that's good enough for me. When I watch people that see the movie and go get the therapy and come back, because I do podcasts now as well. Yeah. I've done a couple dozen podcasts where I will spend a couple hours talking to these people after they've seen the movie, and they go off to get the therapy and they come back.
That's cool.
And it's cool, yeah. So to me, that's reward enough. I mean, but monetarily, no. No, there's no.
Yeah.
But luckily, again, I had it funded, so at least I got
Right.
my rent paid and now my flights paid and all of that.
Yeah, man, and it is, when you break even on these films, it's like if you're helping people, even if you're just breaking even on them, it feels like you're doing something, you're contributing to the greater good of humanity almost.
Yeah.
Before we get into the Andorra stuff, I wanted to break down some of what you the pushback that the FDA and the NIH and the NCI these are the government agencies that are supposed to protect us and are basically created to kind of push humanity forward to that next, I guess, pinnacle of civilization. But it seems like they've just become gatekeepers now.
Well, yeah. I mean, what the regulatory agencies were originally designed to protect the public. But if you are a company that relies on the regulatory agency's permission to do X, Y, and Z, after enough years, you're just basically going to pay off the regulatory agency or put your people in your company to work for the regulatory agency or hire people from the regulatory agency to work for your company, and it just ends up becoming bought and paid for. That's just how it goes. I mean, that's just how it goes. Yeah.
And it seems to be no different whether you're the FDA and you're dealing with medical or you're the SEC and you're dealing with banking.
Oh.
I mean, Bernie Madoff's brother was like the head of the SEC during the great '08 financial crisis, and we can't figure out why nobody's ever been arrested besides Madoff.
Jennifer Calvary, because this is a part of the Andorra story,
Yes, I want to get into
she
her.
was a part of HSBC when they were laundering untold money with the Sinaloa drug cartel, right? She was working like as a head of compliance, I believe, for HSBC at the time.
Yep.
What is she doing now? She's the head of America's FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. I mean, come on.
Okay.
This is just repeated over the years. Like, but the NCI is not a regulatory agency. It's just America's But no, that's the revolving door between the regulatory agencies and corporations. It's just business as usual, man. That's just how it goes. I mean, that's just the way it is. They're never going to allow anything that is going to disrupt this company. Here's a great example. Ralph Moss, Sloan-Kettering story.
Yeah.
On April Fools, before this whole blew up, on April Fools, because he worked in public relations, his boss goes, "Hey man, let's put out a April Fool's memo." This is like back when printed memos were put on people's desks. We're going to say, we have found the cure for cancer, stand by, we'll tell you what's going to happen next.
Oh my gosh, it's brilliant.
And everybody got really melancholy and were freaking out thinking they're going to lose their job. What does that tell you? No one got excited. Yeah. Everybody's like, "Oh no, what are we going to do?" Like, so just speaking of which, the FDA knows that if somebody, like, let's just say you and I whip up a cure for cancer, and we somehow are able to release it to market, which the FDA would never allow you to do it, because if you release a cure for cancer and you're a cancer researcher, you're just put yourself out of business. Think about it. Your job is to keep everything sustained, create a drug that keeps people on for the rest of their lives. That's where the money is. You make something that someone takes once, or even over the course of a year, you just put yourself out of business. Not only that, the NCI, the National Cancer Institute, they get matching government, first of all, they're funded by the government, so why would you need them anymore? How many people work there? Think about it. If you are a cancer research institution like a college, like say UCLA, and you have a whole division dedicated to cancer research, the government matches dollar for dollar based on private donors. So think about if UCLA's cancer research department, just one college in America, if cure for cancer occurs, how many people lose their jobs? Like, just think about that.
Yeah.
And so not only that, think about how much of the stock market is propped up. It's not just chemotherapy and radiation and surgery and the radiation machines and all, but it's all the anti-inflammatories. It's everything that goes with it. All the diagnostics. It goes out the door. Like, it is devastating to what it would do to the economy. I did the math because we actually sold a television show based on this that we never got it to air. I can talk about this later too, but me and my writing partner sat down and we did the math. It took us about a week to figure out how much does the cancer industry bring in. And we tried to be really conservative, like annually. Globally, the bare minimum is $4 trillion a year. Cancer. Again, it's not just the therapies.
Whoa.
It's all the radiation machines that are sold. It's all the surgeries involved.
Yep.
It's all the anti-inflammatories and all the things that go along with chemotherapy. Like, if you just vanish $4 trillion, and people think, oh, a cure for cancer would be worth a fortune. You might wait, what, $1 trillion a year? You're still throwing $3 trillion down the drain. Like, you know what I mean? Of global market, and not to mention that's it. It's over. It's over.
Whoa.
Because if you can find a cure for cancer, you probably could find something that prevents it too.
That's what I was literally just thinking to myself.
It's all the same. It's all in the same, wheelhouse.
Because, then once you find the cure, then you find the preventative care for it, and then you no longer even need the cure. Because
and frankly, Laetril's already there. If everybody got Laetrile once a month, it's like $100 worth, injected into their arm, because you'd have to find a doctor that would do it, of course, because you can't get it done here. You probably could prevent cancer across the country, if not the world.
It's funny is all of a sudden, Putin put out that video where he was talking about Russia had developed a cure for cancer, this cancer vaccine, and he was going to be releasing it, and it was like weeks later the Ukraine war started. And it's like there's this much money and this much power. I'm not saying that that's connected in any way, shape, or form, but it's funny the length that our government will go.
Well, what's interesting too is the guys in the government that are stopping this, they will get this therapy. Do you know that Jackie Kennedy was lined up to get Burzynski's therapy right at the last minute and she didn't make it? I can't tell you the names, but I can tell you humongous oligarchs have gone to Burzynski. Very big people have gone to him.
And been cured?
Well, usually they go when it's too late because what happens is, but they still sought it.
Yeah.
Some of the same people that are responsible for stopping this. But what happens is when you're that big, you're told, you're brainwashed into thinking you've got the best possible doctors.
Yeah, 100%.
And once the best possible doctor in the world goes, dude, you're done. Then you go, oh, then you go to Burzynski, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah.
But what I do, since we're on the subject, I do something called Gallery, ends in an I, not a Y. It's a blood test. It's expensive, like $1,000 a year. And it can pick up cancer cells at the blood level before the tumor is formed. I do that every year because of my BRCA2. And I also get a full body MRI. I just had my first one about a month ago. So I'm going to start doing that every 12 to 24 months. I mean, it's a lot of out-of-pocket expenses, but it's if you can catch it early, because that's the name of the game with this illness, unfortunately. Yeah.
You talked a little bit about the pushback. You had said you got taken off Amazon. Multiple of your documentaries have been taken off
All
Amazon.
of them, except for the fetal stem cell. Here's what's interesting. Sorry to interrupt.
No.
They've left the fetal stem cell subject alone. I'm still on Amazon and with my God cells and the Ukraine Fetal Stem Cell Pioneers. And I think because the powers that be, because they knew that Burzynski Part 1 and 2 and Second Opinion could do extreme damage to the industry, but they look at fetal stem cells, this is my intuition, I have no proof of this. They just go, okay, this will never make it anywhere. It'll never make it through approval for the abortion issue alone. Mm-hmm. And it's such a small amount of people getting this. By the way, it's less than 30,000 people worldwide since the 90s that have ever had it, and I'm one of them. I'm dead serious. I did the math on that. I went through all the patients that Rader had ever treated. I'm ballparking it, and I asked MCell to give me, not names, but how many patients have they treated? Not repeat patients, just individually. It's around 30,000, and I've had it 9 times, and I'm one of those 30,000. So my point is that why push back on something that no one's going to pay attention to anyway? Mm-hmm. They're leaving that alone. But yeah, so I've had Burzynski is the best one because it'll get on a new YouTube channel. It just happened a couple of years ago. Get 1 million views in like a week and a half and go get wiped. And then it'll pop up over here and it'll take off and then then they take it down, for medical misinformation. If you put it on Facebook now, it'll have that little disclaimer. This is medical disinformation. You cannot, yeah. So yeah, Burzynski's still been the king as far as like the one that really irritates the powers that be. Second Opinion, I haven't been as aggressive with because of how scary that was as far as like how ruthless they were. So it's still online. If you go to my website, ericmerola.com, there's a button. And I think it's the only one that's still on YouTube. And it's not called that. It's called like Cancer Controversy or something benign. And so, but without the title. And I think that's the only reason why it's still up.
Wow.
But I kind of got tired of fighting it. You know what I mean? Like I also, well, that is an important part of my life, but I was like, okay, I'd look at everything and I was like, no one's going to ever resurrect Laetrile. If people know about it, great. We failed miserably to try to make a difference with this. I'm glad I told the story and it needed to be told finally in a documentary form. And the guy, Ralph, was very happy to like tell the story finally instead of just somebody reading his book that's decades old. But I was still so passionate about fetal stem cells that I didn't want to interfere with that. I didn't want to rock the boat too much. They were leaving this alone. Why use this to just irritate them enough to start messing with that?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, all right.
And when you put these on Amazon, are you selling them on Amazon or is this something that...
I have a distributor. The distribution model changes all the time, but at the time, you can get it on Amazon Prime, where people could watch it for free if they have a Prime account. Yeah. But now it's been like whittled down to like you pay $1 or $2 to rent it or $3 to buy it. Mm-hmm. It's there. But what you really want is streaming, where anybody that is a Amazon Prime member can watch it, just like if you're a Netflix member could watch it. I had that for years, but those days are gone. Yeah, because of the medical misinformation. They will allow the stem cell movie to stay there for purchase or rental. That's it.
And you had to go through a company to get them listed there, or you could just create an account and put your own ones there?
No, they can never create. You have to go through a third-party distributor. So I work with a distributor out of Barcelona. I've worked with many over the years, but I like these guys the most. So what I do is I started out with them because I always wanted, because I had such a history. I was on Netflix. I was on PBS. By the way, all of these films up until the Godsons were all on PBS and regional, like in Colorado PBS and some of the other affiliates around PBS. I was so used to like having a lot of attention. It was hard to just settle with just YouTube. But the new distributor, what he does now, and the new model is for these kinds of movies, aside from Rumble, but to get more eyeballs on YouTube, there's so many YouTube channels now that have like 1 million+ subscribers, and you'll notice like they'll pop up a new movie every day, and they monetize them. And you have to deal with the ads, or you get an ad blocker. So what my model is now is the company, they're called Sideways Films. Anyway, what they do is that you show them your new project, and then they send it out to all of their aggregators, if you would, or they're kind of an aggregator in and of themselves, and they just kind of pitch it to these big YouTube channels, for example. And so if a YouTube channel with like 1 million subscribers agrees to have it on, and then everybody that's subscribed gets the email that, hey, this movie just popped up, and then you just do a bunch of those. And then that's how it's monetized. I don't make a living off the monetization. It's not enough. Yeah. But it's unfortunate because if they just left Burzynski alone, I could make a living off of it because I made a really nice amount of money in the week and a half. It got 1 million views on that one channel before it was yanked. If I had keep that, then the momentum was outrageous because you'd see day one, it's like 180,000. Day two, 300,000.
Yeah,
you just watch it explode and just snowball out of control until they come in and have it yanked. But. Yeah, so YouTube really is it. I mean, now that we have YouTube apps on our television now, people almost don't know the difference or care anymore. It used to be that YouTube was kind of like a lower brow tier. Now everything's on YouTube.
I agree. I was just watching it here. All right, let's jump into the Andorra. Where do you think is a good spot to start? I wrote some notes down, but I know that the documentary is it went into different parts, and I was trying to pay attention, but and in the end completely changed the perspective of what the entire documentary is about. So where do you think is the best spot to start? Because I kind of want to break down. So maybe we just start how you got approached to start the film.
Yeah.
We'll kind of work into it.
I mean, only way to talk about this really is just kind of how I have been, and you guys can edit it down however you want. Because I think I was like exposed to this and how I got into it is really interesting anyway. So I was, like I said, I was working on Ukraine Fetal Stem Cell Pioneers without even really knowing what it was going to be. This is what I was doing. And I was also simultaneously working on this television show I was telling you about, where you actually got hired by a production company to write a television series, kind of like House of Cards, if you would. And what I mean by that is it's real DC, real White House, but all fictional insanity. And so we were hired, honestly, and I worked with an Emmy-nominated writer from Ozark, and we were writing a pilot script and a whole 4-year series document of hashing out the show. So I had other things going on, is my point. And a fan of my work, that I had known some of his people for a while, calls me up, WhatsApp me out of the blue. He's like, dude, we love your work, blah, blah, blah. Remember us? Yeah. I was like, do you want to do a documentary about the corrupt banking system? And I was like, sure. I mean, frankly, like, I would love to do something that's not necessarily in medicine. I've been kind of like in that world. And that's really all I had to go on. And so I was flown by the way, this was very clandestine, and I'm just going to keep it that way. Because that's just, anyway, I know who this person is, but because of, I think by the time you get done hearing this, you'll understand why we want to keep identities.
Yeah,
because
identities are secret.
So if I had said, look, my wife is my production partner. She's going to fly down too. Like, if I'm going to do something like this. Yeah. And by the way, I kind of tried everything I could to kind of make them go away. Because every time I've been approached with many documentary ideas, and they realize how much money it is, how much time it takes, and they go, nah, they just fizzle away. Yep. Not this group, this person and his people. And I kept saying it. This is expensive, blah 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 blah. Like, this is going to take a long time. Oh, we know. Anyway, so I fly down. I basically explained that.
Is this source one you're talking to, or a group of people?
Well, this is the first source.
Source one.
This is the first source. This is the person in group that financed me to do it. Okay.
Call him source one.
But he wasn't. This group wasn't really a source. In fact, as we'll find out later, he didn't know what was really happening.
Okay.
That's what was so interesting about the story. He thought that this bank, BPA, Banca Devata de Andorra, I believe I'm pronouncing it correctly, BPA had stolen not only his money, but all of the banker's money. That's all he had to go on. And frankly, that was kind of the official line, that they were laundering money, they were a corrupt bank, and that they just stole everybody's money. I don't know, that's about the most he knew about it, and that's certainly, I didn't even know that much. So after much back and forth and how much it's gonna cost, like I need this much a month to live off of, because this is gonna take all of my time, right? And I said, you're talking about Andorra, that's across the world. I'm gonna have to take multiple trips there. You're talking about hotels, you're talking about paying my wife, who's my production partner and sound person and second cameraman. I have to, and I realized none of these people speak English, I'm gonna have to hire an interpreter. Like, I just basically ballparked him what this is gonna cost. And they had no problem with it. So I was like, okay. And then frankly, I was like, what have I done? Like, I don't even know what I'm doing. I'm dead serious. Like, if I made a huge mistake, really. And so I realized, like, even though I'm being paid well, and frankly, it was the best I've ever been financed for anything I've ever done. Like, I was given, like, I wouldn't say blank check, but I was basically given assurance that whatever you need, as long as you're making progress, you've got it, right? So I went there first, and everybody's seen the movie. There's two women that speak Spanish and Catalan in the movie. They're two lawyers, females. That's my only lead, because they had been pretty vocal after enough Google searching that they had represented a vast majority of the clients that were banking at BPA. And so they agreed to meet with me. So I fly to Barcelona with my wife. Actually, I was in Ukraine first, working on my thing. And then I fly over from Ukraine to Barcelona. My wife meets me in Barcelona. I drive an hour and a half. Literally, a former race car driver drives me 120 miles an hour from Barcelona to Andorra on these winding roads. It was actually quite amazing. I felt fairly safe, but I had like my equipment banking into me, and like, it was absolutely nuts. So I arrive and I hire a Catalan interpreter. And by the way, once he realized what I was doing, because Andorra is small, it's like the capital is like 30-some thousand people. I think the whole country is like 60-some thousand people. And I just said I'm working on a documentary in Andorra. I need a Catalan interpreter, speaks Catalan, French, Spanish. And once he realized what I was doing, he was like, oh no, he almost quit on me. I was like, dude, come on. And he's like, all right, I'll do it. And luckily he didn't live in Andorra anymore. He lived in Barcelona, and he came in and met me. Because there's a reason why I say that. The translator,
yep.
Yeah. So anyway, I interviewed those two women first to kind of get an idea of this. And it was them explaining basically what the interview shows, that all these people lost their money, that they had no evidence at all of money laundering whatsoever. I'm like, that's interesting. Like, even though, and it's kind of, it's known as a kind of like an offshore place. There's multiple banks there that, and like Andorra itself, it's kind of like a giant duty-free airport zone where all these cosmetics and like all these luxury items are sold duty-free. They also have huge tourism. They have amazing skiing and amazing mountain biking and all these extreme sports, but banking is a big thing. And where it's located, I saw passing people that were from Russia, from China, from all over the world that were there, very well to do. You know what they're doing? They're doing banking there. So that was my first trip, and I went back and I edited it, and I tried to poke around more. And I did some poking around there as well, but I'm just giving you sort of like the bullet points.
Yeah, no, that's great.
So then I started going, okay, I need to speak to somebody at BPA, and like, because it's a small community, and not everybody would open the door. People were like, there was two sides of this. People were A, nervous to talk. B, look at me going, okay, there's a filmmaker from LA, American, doesn't even speak our language. They're like, this guy's not going to figure this out. Like, you know what I mean? They were just like, this guy's not going to do this any justice. He doesn't even know what happened. And then little did I know what happened until it took me much more time later. So I managed to contact the CEO of BPA, who was in prison for 22 months. Right after the thing blew up. I think it was March 15th, 2015, if I'm not mistaken. It was like the day it happened. It was March 2015, I believe. Anyway, and in Andorra, by the way, which is also interesting to learn, is that you can be arrested in Andorra and held for up to 22 months without charges by Andorran law.
Yeah, you just told me that. I was plotting to do a big stunt there.
What?
I was planning to go like raise hell and do a big stunt and get detained. I thought they were just going to deport me.
Well, there's the possibility of that too. Like,
but they don't have to. They could hold me for 2 years.
If they want to. But like, they have been known, like if you become a homeless person in Andorra, that'll drive you to the border and drop you off. If you get caught stealing or something, they're going to drive you to the border and drop you off. Like, I wouldn't risk it.
Yeah.
You could try, but just
not worth
understand.
it.
But that is kind of interesting about Andorra, is that they will just kick you out of the country because it's so this takes them no time to
10 minutes, yes, drive you to the
yeah,
border.
yeah. And also too, as a side note on the abortion issue, because Andorra is a co-principality, the only one like it in the world. You have a president, but then you have two co-princes, and one of them is a member of the Vatican. So abortion is illegal in Andorra, but the Andorran government pays for your abortion if you just anyway.
Oh, wait. So explain the principality.
It's like medieval like times. Like this place. It hasn't become a democracy, Andorra, until 1993. I outlined this in my movie. So it's like a leftover kind of way of governing from like the ancient days, where two princes, so co-principality. So the prince at the time, the Prince of France, and the Prince of Spain appointed by the Vatican would rule and govern Andorra, okay? And it's a bloodline thing, kind of like kings and queens in England. But now, because France is a democracy, there's no prince, so now it's the president. So the president of France is the co-ruler of Andorra, and then the latest prince of whatever, from Spain, excuse me, whoever's appointed by the Vatican from Spain is the other co-prince. However, even that said, it's kind of all for show at this point, kind of like how England is.
Yep.
You have the king and queen and blah, blah, blah. But you still have an elected president of Andorra. So it's just kind of silly, to be honest. But that's the way it's designed.
Okay.
So the French president doesn't have that much influence over Andorra's decisions, other than like bureaucracy a little bit. And then, of course, the Vatican does have influence. That's why abortion is illegal in Andorra.
Yep.
That's about it. It's not really pertaining too much to the story.
And how often do they get appointed to those roles?
You'd have to look it up. But I think it's until the new president is reelected. There's the whoever pops in. And then, of course, the guy from the Vatican dies, like the Pope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. And who was in charge of those? Who was in charge of the country at that time?
Of the BPA explosion?
Yeah.
God, I can't remember the name of the president right now. Oh my gosh, I should know this. I know Rajoy was the president of Spain, but you know what? Forgive me.
That's okay. That's all right.
It's a hard name to pronounce as well, but he's in the movie. It's not the same president that's there now.
Okay.
But, yeah.
All right. I was just curious. I just feel it over.
He's not as relevant. I mean, but yeah, because what we'll learn when you dive into it, that Andorra just had to kind of bow down. And it doesn't really matter who anybody else, any president would have done the same thing. Not that it was a right thing to do. But so anyway, so the CEO says, I can't talk to you. My lawyer will not let me go on camera. Like, I'm still in the middle of a court battle over this. I'm thinking, what? Like, I was there in 2019. It had been 4 years. Again, I was just so naive. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And he goes,
So this all happened in 2015.
Yeah.
And then now you're 2019, just starting to dig into it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And remember, I went in cold. I'm like Sherlock Holmes, dude. I was not only an investigative journalist, but I was Sherlock Holmes. Like, I figured out the story. Like, none of the mainstream media had told the story yet. Because none of the mainstream media was either A, allowed, or B, understood it. So I'm fast forwarding here, but then the CEO puts me in touch. I'm actually in a hotel I learned later that one of the owners of BPA owned. So I didn't realize this, but they sent me there because it was protected, because they owned it. That's how deep this goes. So not that I would have been killed, and I'll tell you a story later about how I was in a not so friendly hotel and had to run. Not for my life or being, but they wouldn't let me film any there anymore. And it was enough harassment where I had to pack up and go.
Yeah.
Because it was owned by another competing bank that wanted to make sure the true story was not going to come out. So anyway, so I'm at this hotel. I think it's called the Plaza, I believe. There's a plaza there. Anyway, so the CEO just arbitrarily introduces me to this guy, Joan. He was in the movie. I opened the movie with this guy. And he said, meet Joan. And he also, truthfully, John spoke way better English than the CEO or most people I met. And Joan was just the kind of personality that is like me or you, where even though he was involved and he was in this debacle, he just was the kind of guy that like did the research and like he was the kind of guy almost like that had all the postcards on the wall with the strings connecting, metaphorically. He didn't really, you know what I mean? He really wanted to get to the bottom of this. So once I spent enough time with him and he understood that I was intelligent enough and maybe I had the right intentions, we probably spent nearly 6 hours in the lobby. My wife was getting exhausted with this. She went upstairs and we were ordering more coffees and food. And he had a pad like you and he was explaining to me that went way over my head, like what really happened. And I still didn't wrap my head around it. And
is he speaking English or no?
Yeah, I speak in English, so I had no choice. And the interpreter part was done.
Okay.
And he was also charging me like €100 an hour or something. That would have just added up. Plus, Joan spoke English. So he's basically explaining to me that they were framed for money laundering. Now imagine this, sitting down in one sitting, that you didn't know anything about this, that BPA was the only innocent bank in the country. And I'm trying to believe this, right? Because I know it's and then number two, they were framed for money laundering. I'm like, okay. Oh, and the Spanish, he's like, are you familiar with Catalonia? I'm like, no. Are you familiar that Catalonia has been trying to separate from Spain for No. Like, do you know that there's like an underground war going on between Madrid and Catalonia? No. Where's Catalonia? Where'd you fly in? Barcelona? That's Catalonia. Oh, okay. Like, I had no idea. And he's like, well, our bank got hit, basically got taken down because they were trying to destroy the Catalonian leadership by the Spanish secret police, and the Americans help them out. America helped them out. I'm thinking, like, what is happening? What am I listening to?
Yeah.
Way over my head. I didn't really understand any of it, but I knew there was enough here to interest me and keep me going. So Joanne and I became like buds, and I asked him, kind of like my Burzynski days or anything I'd ever done. I was like, if you say this is true, I just feel like a surgeon with it. I was like, then can you prove to me that this is true? Like, where are you getting this information? Okay, I get that far. Next. And then as this happens, I took 4 trips to Andorra overall and spent countless hours on Zoom calls and WhatsApp remotely. So as I'm gaining more of his, as he's trusting me more, I'm meeting more of the bankers. They're kind of coming out of the woodwork. And some of them had left Andorra. I met some of them in Barcelona. And then, I can go back on this, but basically, once I understood what was happening, what was also fun is that he'll probably be watching these people, but I told him what happened, what I learned, and he didn't believe it. The person financing this, he didn't believe it because they were so set on corrupt bank stole his money.
Yeah.
They didn't understand that the Catalonian fight, they didn't understand any of this.
Yeah.
And it took a long time, understandably, to wrap their head around. Like, they wonder if they made a mistake. Now I'm looking in a different direction when they thought I should be looking at the corrupt bank. And it turns out the bank was the only non-corrupt bank in the whole country of Andorra.
Yeah, and at that time, we didn't understand this big regime change and how our government's involved with overthrowing other governments, and this is just another day for them.
But this wasn't as big as that. What happened was, so speaking of that, so what happened was, the goal was to destroy. Okay, so Madrid in Spain has been trying to go after Catalonia for generations. It's almost like as if the Catalonians are Jews in Nazi Germany. Like, it's like they've been constantly repressed. And for years, and I show this in the movie, like in the time when Hitler was still alive and Franco were both still alive, you would be beaten or imprisoned if you were caught speaking Catalonian, which is the official language, Catalan, which is Andorra's official language. If you were caught reading a book in Catalan, you would be beaten and imprisoned. It was like they were trying to erase the Catalan, culture, if you would.
Spain was. So the Spaniards were going after the Catalonians.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what's interesting, though, is there's 2 reasons for this. One is of course, it has to do with money. Because Catalonia, where Barcelona is where most of the revenue was made. Also, by the way. And so there was like multi-layers of complicated reasons why this was constantly a conflict. And I interviewed a Catalan woman that's in the movie who even to this day, like they'll go deeper into Spain, towards Madrid. They'll be in a store speaking Catalan, and somebody will overhear him and scream at them for speaking Catalan. How dare you speak Catalan? You're in Spain. You speak Spanish. Like, can you imagine? This is all one country of Spain. Like,
yeah.
I mean, imagine if somebody was speaking French or Italian and you scream at them, "Don't you dare speak Italian on the streets of LA." Like, it's just ridiculous. Like, to chastise somebody. Anyway, but that's how bad it is in Spain to this day. This is an age-old problem. And what's interesting, too, on this note is Franco was like the Hitler of Spain, right?
Yep.
Like, when Hitler and Mussolini and all these guys lost power, that was usually a revolution and a violent uprising. And as Carles Puigdemont, who I interviewed, the former president of Catalonia, said, the only reason Spain became a democracy is because of biology, because Franco died. That's it, because he died, that's it. And then the dictatorship ended, and now we're a democracy because he died of natural causes. Like, Spain is a mess, like, as far as, like, people get mad at America being really corrupt and crazy. Spain is nuts. Like, I learned. Anyway, but I don't want to poo-poo on Spain. Yeah. I mean, it's also a beautiful country, and I really enjoy being there. But I'm just saying, from a government standpoint, like, some of the stuff America does, like, they do way worse. Like, I mean, for example, I think it's okay because I have him on camera saying I didn't include it in the movie. But remember when that van went driving through Barcelona and plowing over people? Mm-hmm. That was totally the Spanish secret police organized that whole thing. Yeah. Boom. Once again. And because it was leading up to the Catalonian vote. Yeah. But I didn't put it in the film because I felt like it wasn't relevant to the story. But I thought, I'm going to save this for something, so I guess I'll just tell you now.
So the Spanish police staged that as like a terrorist attack?
When the president of Catalonia, who's like has a lot to lose by telling something, let me get back to Carles Puigdemont because that's a part of the story. So, but anyway, I'll get back to that. But the point is, I did interview former presidents of Catalonia because they had their own elected presidents. So in this process,
and he went to jail.
No, he was the only one that didn't. because he managed to get the hell out of there because he went to exile in Belgium. His entire cabinet went to jail.
They spent 2 years in jail, didn't
At least,
they?
I think longer.
Oh my gosh.
I think some of them might even still be in jail, frankly. I mean, I don't even know. It's been many years. It's been 5 years, but I mean, I don't follow it like I used to.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, yeah, it's in the movie. I mean, when they were all being sentenced and everything.
You had to become one of the most popular people in Catalonia at one point.
Well, yeah, I was when this thing hit.
Yeah.
Absolutely, I was like a superstar until it was yanked off of Amazon Prime.
Yeah,
and then yanked off of YouTube certainly after. But no, and Andorra, everybody knew my name when this thing. Anyway, so
the medical shit blows my mind. That I can understand, medical misinformation, but a fucking story on a bank.
Yeah. So once I started meeting more and more bankers, and they all kept telling me the same thing, like this has to do with Madrid using its Spanish secret police to try to take out the Catalonian leadership's money. They thought that if we can blow up their banks, like metaphorically, and take away their money, it'll at least slow them down. Because Catalonia had really gained some momentum as far as their independence movement. I left that part out. So Catalonian has forever tried to gain independence from Spain. And not only is that insulting to Spain from a philosophical point of view, but Catalonia is where all the money is. And so if Catalonia separates from Spain, like that's where Barcelona is, Spain would be hurt tremendously from a financial point of view. So at the very least, financially, they cannot let Catalonia separate from Spain.
Yeah.
And again, it's from years, generations of abuse from the Spanish to the Catalonians. It's not just about them Catalonians being greedy and want to keep the money. They're like sick of Spain and their treatment towards Catalonia. So yeah, once I started really wrapping my head around this, I'm like, okay, well, I have to unravel this. I can't just say that. I mean, I have to hold on to my integrity and like somehow prove it, right? So after enough time, like anything, you spend enough time on the ground, meeting people. Then at this point, they were watching my previous movies. Like they found Burzynski and went, oh, okay, all right, this guy, wow. And they were like asking me all these questions about it. Because it was kind of similar to their story, but in a totally different, world. And so it was one of those situations where one thing led to another, and I had to think on my feet really fast. So I would meet people and be like, what are you doing now? Like we'd talk like this, like I'm staying at this hotel, or I'll be in my own hotel lobby. And I'd be prepared for this. I'd have cameras set up just in case they'd say yes. Like Pablo, this guy's young guy named Pablo, I can't remember his last name. He's in my hotel room. I just went right upstairs, got him. And we went to the hotel roof even. But anyway, what started getting interesting is, of course I met with attorneys. There's a lot of attorneys because they're representing these clients. And you find out they're representing the bankers because they were framed for money laundering. Let's get into that for a minute. So, okay, but here's what happened. Let's just get it right down to the brass tacks of what happened, and I'll get into how I was able to prove it. So, a member of the Spanish secret police had gone to the CEO of BPA. This is how the bank got blown up, and said, "You're going to hand us these Catalonian leaders that we believe they have bank accounts with you, but they can't prove it because of privacy reasons. They go, here's the list of Catalonian leaders. You need to hand over those bank accounts to us." And of course, the CEO, this is the same CEO that was thrown in prison for 22 months for jail, and said, if you don't hand over these accounts, this is where it gets, ready? He goes, we are going to have the United States Treasury we will have the United States destroy your bank. Simple as that. If you do not hand over these accounts by this deadline, we will have the United States destroy your bank. So the Spanish secret police drives to Andorra and threatens Andorra's bank, BPA, one of them, with the United States. Like what? Right? Like how does that even add up, right? Little did the person know that he had his phone and he was recording the whole conversation. It's in the movie.
Yep.
But I reveal that later. So how did that happen? So what they did is the Spanish secret police ginned up and faked a bunch of money laundering by using real clients that BPA had. So they had 4 categories. It's like 4 golden gooses for the U.S. Treasury, right? Or FinCEN. Venezuela, easy. That's easy. China, ooh. Russia, ooh. Sinaloa, what drug cartel, ooh. So let's start with Sinaloa, by the way, just is so funny. Andorra is landlocked between France and Spain. That would mean they would have to take hundreds of millions, if not $1 billion, on a boat from Sinaloa, drug cartel location. So, but then I was explaining this. Like they're like, look, dude, do you think we were honestly laundering money for the Sinaloa drug cartel? They were like, dude, this is what the bankers were telling me. They're like, so that would mean, like, we have plenty of people that work in cash, right? But like any bank, people come in with the cash. And if it's over a certain amount, they have to declare it, right? But it's like the Sinaloa drug cartel, that would mean they have to come all the way from Mexico by boat or plane, undetected, with barrels of cash, and somehow get it through multiple borders and get it to our bank unnoticed for how many years? They're like, there's no way we laundered some money for the Sinaloa drug cartel. Like, they had no accounts for anybody. Like, it was all nonsense. So what happened was this member of the secret police, who was revealed later, goes all the way to the United States with this fake money laundering business, Venezuela, China, Russia, Sinaloa, and convinces FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, which, by the way, this is interesting, to issue what's called a Section 311. I'm going to get into some technicals here. After September the 11th, 2001, the Patriot Act was introduced. And as a way to fight terrorism, they created something called a Section 311. And it's a part of the Patriot Act. And what a Section 311 is, it's just entitled Section 311. It's basically designed for preventing money laundering, right? So if a bank is found guilty of money laundering, or even suspicion of money laundering, they release a Section 311, which is essentially a one-page like press release, into the bank atmosphere. And whoever the target of that in this case BPA, every other bank has no choice but to cut off their access to the dollar and the euro and all financial system. And so once you're cutting off the arteries to the bank, so the bank just dies. And all the money within it dies as well, metaphorically. So that's what happened. So the Spanish secret police goes to the US Treasury and says, we got all this proof. And they just tricked. The US fooled them. The US Treasury was completely naive, had no idea that they were being tricked, into issuing this Section 311. And they did. And so what's interesting, if you look into Section 311, HSBC should have had a Section 311 with laundering Sinaloa. How many Deutsche Bank, how many banks have been busted laundering money? In the billions, okay? No Section 311 has ever been issued against any of these banks. It has only been used as a weapon to kill the smaller banks. And in some cases, just for the hell of it, because this bank's kind of tiny and let's just blow it up because they compete with Chase in this region or whatever. So that's also interesting, is how it's been used as a form of warfare, monetary warfare, if you would, or however you want to define it. But they had all the reasons to send out the Section 311. And so what's interesting, too, is if you look up Section 311, if you Google it, how many banks have had a Section 311? You'll look at almost all of them have had the Section 311 like, revoked. So what they do is they send it out, kill the bank, and they go, oops, we made a mistake. Sorry about that. We'll say we're erasing the Section 311. We didn't mean it. So the bank's innocent. But at that point, the bank's dead. And that's exactly what they did. But what's hilarious is, you find out later, they hit the wrong bank. None of the Catalonian leadership had anything in BPA. And so which led me was to meet some of the biggest lawyers in the game, like this guy named Gonzalo Boyer, who's friends with, the guy that did the Edward Snowden documentary. That's that really famous journalist from The Guardian. He represented him from some of his legal battles. Big time attorney, like with human rights attorney. Gonzalo Boyer happened to be the attorney for Carles Puigdemont, who was in exile in Belgium, former president of Catalonia. And why he's important is that Carles Puigdemont did a actual referendum, a voting day, to have Catalonia vote itself whether they want to stay with Spain or leave Spain. And the Spanish secret police came in, not secret, actual SWAT teams came in, and I have this in the movie, I could dig up the footage, and beat the hell out of men, women, children, drag people downstairs to try to prevent them from voting. And people bleeding, all over Catalonia. Yeah. And so right after that, they arrested his entire cabinet, and he luckily got the hell out, and he was in Belgium at the time. So I'm interviewing Boyer about the whole BPA situation, and he's explaining this to me further and further. He's like, I said, so you represent Carles Puigdemont? I said, do you think he would talk to me? He's like, let me call him. He's sitting right in the middle of the camera's rolling. He calls him. Yeah. You can get in touch with his chief of staff, and he'll arrange the whole thing for you. That's how fast this happened. So I went from there to Belgium, interviews Puigdemont in this hotel, and he's like a superstar in Catalonia. So he's like by himself. I couldn't believe it. They had no security staff or anything. I have pictures of me walking with him down the hall and stuff. It's kind of fun. He spills the whole beans on the whole thing, says all of it. Says the most. I just really need to release his interview in its entirety one day. Anyway, and of course, since I had Puigdemont, the superstar of Catalonia, I got Artur Mas, his president before him. And Artur Mas got fined and almost destroyed because he held a fake referendum. and it admitted, it's like, this is just a test referendum. It doesn't mean anything. It's non-binding. I just want to see like a poll of Catalonia. He was almost taken down, if not completely taken down because of that. So here I am at this point because I've had all this clout behind me. I just interviewed Puigdemont. I just interviewed Gonzalo Boye. I just interviewed, I was like the buzz. So I had to take advantage of this momentum. So Artur Mas's staff just verifies that I met with Puigdemont. They go, this guy lives in LA. He's an American filmmaker. Interested? Sure, why not? So all of a sudden I'm interviewing president number 2. Couldn't believe it. And Artur Mas says, he goes, yes, he says it, he looks like a movie star, this guy, and he talks like one. And he just said something to the effect of, they miss me, they miss me. I didn't have any money at BPA. It was just hysterical. So, and my point is that everything was being verified, like left and right. When you have 2 former presidents of Catalonia willing to tell you the same story that all the bankers are telling you, that everybody else is telling you, and then you learn how far this goes back from generations ago and how long this has been going on. And then when Puigdemont admits, basically with the cameras rolling, probably not realizing that the terrorist attack on Catalonia was actually Spanish secret police, and they found out that the guy driving the van was directly tied to the secret police of Spain. It's just, this is deep. So anyway, long story short, I got everything together. I had all the bankers that would talk to me. I had, and also documents. That was another big stickler for me. So, which is a pain in the ass because I had to get it all translated from Catalan into English. and I also realized in the middle of this, I'm like, I got to make a Spanish version of this film. Like it's really Spain that's going to be the most audience. Yeah. So I actually managed to raise the money through people financing this to pay for the biggest Spanish narrator in Spain who would do the voice for Brad Pitt or Tom Cruise whenever a movie goes to Spain. He narrated the whole thing. I was going to do it in Catalan as well, but I was able to blow it open. And so much, and the biggest smoking gun was the recording that the CEO had. And so what's interesting is the CEO recorded it, was arrested shortly after that. They took his phone away, but he was smart enough to upload it to a cloud. And he had to wait 22 months before he was let out to have access to it. And they had no idea. And once he got out, he had access to it, and he held it close to his chest. He did eventually try it before I came along, give it to some members of the press, but it was never taken seriously. And it was poo-pooed all over by the media. It was just like whitewashed, right? And so that was it. Like that was like the ultimate smoking gun, like to basically conclude the movie with this was the plan all along. We even identified who the member of the secret police was. I can't pronounce his name, but who went to the U.S. Treasury because everybody was at such point that was involved on the Madrid side was so proud of what they had done, they were getting sloppy. And so he even went on camera explaining what he did, but with his face blacked out, with his face changed. But you could see in the silhouette, and you could see by his mannerisms, and you can match him up. And then he later was uncovered to be that's the same guy that went to the Treasury. That he just, it just all fell together. Like any good problem, especially when somebody does something this conspiratorial successfully, it just gets messy. People get clumsy, and they start making mistakes, and that's what the Spanish did. And they just left a trail of breadcrumbs. And also, too, people, because they were so corrupt, people that were arrested, that were involved in it, had to start falling on their knives and getting arrested for other reasons, but they were also involved in the BPA cover-up. So they, to try to help them get out of trouble, they were spilling the beans on how they helped BPA get blown up. So it just kind of dominoed by the time I came along. And sure enough, I'm in Andorra, and I ended the movie with the bankers on trial still for the fake Venezuelan money laundering, Sinaloa, still China and Russia. And I didn't understand anything going on in the courtroom, but so the bankers are still facing multiple years in prison and hundreds of millions of dollars in euros, fines or whatever. I don't know the exact amount. The bankers are still facing charges. And the bank holders hardly any of them gotten their money back. But the only thing the movie did do is that I also had the resources to hire PR. So I got a glowing review in The Guardian, which I've never had a review in The Guardian before. And of course, The Guardian's like, for things like this. And it just wrote a glowing review. And it was so good that all of the bloggers and the media across Spain and Andorra and France started doing articles about the Guardian article.
Yeah.
It's like, holy shit, it was reviewed in the Guardian, glowingly. And Catalonian television approached me and said, well, first of all, the Spanish PR people couldn't go anywhere because nobody in Spain would allow any of the truth to be published. So it was a waste of money on behalf of the financing. It was a lot of money for Spanish PR. They just hit walls. The highest, most powerful PR firms in Spain couldn't go anywhere, even within Catalonia. And then my tiny little American PR person who I've used for years, who only does movie reviews. She doesn't even try to hit the big media. She's the one that got me in The Guardian, not those people, Anyway, but Catalonian television, because they had every reason to be behind this, it was so insane, the story, it was too hot for them even. So what they did, they redid my movie. They got the CEO to go on camera and told it in a nice way. They didn't use any of my footage, but they just retold my story on Catalonian television. So I was kind of proud and no, at least I broke through. And at least, and the narrative went from conspiracy theory nonsense, there's no way Spain's secret police did this with America's help and blah, blah, to fact. It's finally today, everybody admits it's fact. But because Andorra is such a closed off country in every way, and it's a kangaroo court, they have no choice but to continue on the facade that there was really money laundering there. And this is still going on. But just recently, I can send you the article, it's just a couple of weeks ago, one of them has finally been expunged. I think Sinaloa finally went away, and the second one was, I can't remember if it's Venezuela, China, or Russia. Maybe it's Russia. Finally went away, so it's being whittled down. But so they still have 2 of the 4 left. So Andorra's judicial system still chipping away at it, because they have to make it look like those really money laundering. Otherwise, it just blows up in their face. You know what I mean?
And then they would be held accountable to release the billions of dollars that they have.
Well, it's roughly about €1 billion. And it's a lot of money, but it's a small bank. But it's still a lot of money, right? And people's entire retirement accounts were in there, But so it's a lot of money, but. The problem is, and I've asked this question to everybody, and some of the lawyers went on camera and just burst out laughing. They're like, no, nobody's going to get their money back. Some people will, but it's a mystery as to what was used to fund all this extra stuff in Andorra. Where did they get the funding from? So there's a high probability that they've been funneling money out of BPA's, people's bank accounts, and to fund things like fighting the court case against the bankers that isn't real. You know what I mean? Funding has to come from somewhere. And there's no audit to see where it's coming from. You following this? So there's a lot of reason to believe it. I don't want to make people watching this who have money in BPA to get disappointed. And it doesn't mean they can't get their money back. I'm not saying that. It's just that I was told by every attorney I spoke to and anybody close to this that there's no way everybody's getting their money back. It's just not going to happen. And even Silvestri is one of the attorneys who said he lost everything. He and his wife both lost everything. They had to start from zero. He was one of the attorneys in the case that's representing bankers or clients. But he's also had an account in BPA.
Yep.
Right. So and even he's like, I'm not going to get my money back. So
he's a younger looking guy.
He has glasses. He's skinny, very kind of animated.
Okay.
He's younger for sure. Silvestre. It's Sylvester, but in this Catalonian version of Silvestre, I assume. But he talks about how he and his wife lost everything. He's the one that he's talking about, because they had to try to find money laundering in the bankers. That's another thing that's hilarious, is that there was the job, actually, I've left that a big part of this. A huge auditing firm from America was sent to Andorra to find Pricewaterhouse to find the money laundering. Okay, but they couldn't find anything. So they had to find dumb shit. Like, this person bought a Ford for €300, an old used Ford. But where did they get the €300? Oh, it was cash. I got it from. You can't prove you got money laundering. That kind of stuff. That was one of Silvestri's little bits in my movie. So, but this debacle is still going on to this day. It's almost a it's almost a comedy if it wasn't so horrible. But because Andorra doesn't have to answer to anybody, because they're a private, they have their own sovereignty, and the judicial system, and kind of like the incestuous relationship with FDA, and it's the same thing. They have to continue on this theatrical charade. And it's still kind of continuing to this day. It's the best I could, yeah.
And so PricewaterhouseCoopers is connected to Jordi
Cinca.
Right,
that's another,
Yeah, tell me about this guy.
Well, there's tentacles everywhere with all of this. Yeah. And it's been a little while since I've been in this, but Jordi Cinca is a very shady character. I mean, he was involved, he's involved with some kind of warlord in Africa, I believe, who was involved in the gold mining trade, where these are people that have their arms and legs cut off, for being accused for stealing gold. Jordi Cinca was
diamonds, wasn't it?
Diamonds, excuse me, blood diamond trade, excuse me. And Jordi Cinca was backing this guy. Jordi Cinca and Jordi Cinca's entire family, are involved in all kinds of shady stuff, as well. But what's interesting too is, Jordi Cinca, there's enough evidence to believe that Jordi Cinca chose Pricewaterhouse in exchange for having a position at Pricewaterhouse. And once the media got a hold of it and just the general public, he had to kind of pull back and go, okay, no.
Yeah.
And now shady Jordi Cinca is in charge of Andorra's retirement system, last I had checked.
Yeah.
That was at least when I was finishing the movie. So So in regards, when you have a lot of money and you open up a new bank account, there's a whole compliance section. So especially in a sort of tax haven situation like Andorra, even though it technically was a tax haven, as a side note, BPA wanted to be one of the only like above board banks in Andorra. So when the Sierco brothers bought BPA, the Sierco brothers had a long history with Andorra, people that owned BPA, which kind of adds to the story. They made their fortune because they came into Andorra back when Andorra had a population of 10,000, and they managed to license Philip Morris cigarettes from America. And Philip Morris thought nothing of it because they were like, they're such a small country, like who cares? And they were able to grow tobacco. So they just licensed the name Marlboro and a lot of Philip Morris's like names, and it just exploded. And they were shipping cigarettes all over Europe from Andorra, and they just became like multi-billionaires. Anyways, so Andorra, like the old school Andorrans, because they weren't really from Andorra, they're actually from Spain, and they moved to Andorra as like in their 20s. So there's also a problem with the whole Andorra thing is like the culture is like, oh, they're not really Andorran. Yeah. They come in here and they take over business-wise. Anyway, so, but to give you an idea of like how above board BPA was, they were trying to expand, and they opened up Banco Madrid in Madrid. They were the only bank in Andorra that was branching out of Andorra to try to become a powerhouse banking network. And the only way you can do that, especially opening up a bank in Spain, is to be above board. You can't like have, anyway. So when you have like the 4 big cases that were accused of money laundering, like the Russians, the Chinese, the Venezuelans, and the Sinaloas, which there's no Sinaloa account to begin with, but let's just take Russia, for example. Viktor Kanenkin was an oil guy in Russia. When you, and like anybody that had a bank in Andorra, mostly, if you're not from there, you're just placing your money. I got some in Switzerland, I got some in Andorra, I got some over here. You just spread it around in case one of the banks, go down, or just what you do when you have that much money, right? So the head of compliance, before you can open an account, they have to go through great scrutiny. And so they hired all these independent auditors to audit these people's, lifestyle accounts and wire transfers, see if they linked to some shady activity. They have to pass through massive compliance before the account can even be opened. And so to suggest that they were laundering money through BPA would also suggest that the compliance officers were not doing their job, right?
Yeah.
And what's interesting too is when you see the compliance officer in my documentary is like she was working directly with Pricewaterhouse, working directly with all these people on good faith.
Yeah, they called her, right? Or like, you need to shut the count down.
Because she was the head of the. That's one of the cases where she was called out of dinner to shut down a case. Of like I think it was Viktor Kanenkin. Yeah. But when it comes to like say Kroll, in this case, like Kroll is just one of the other auditing firms of the many. They don't just hire one auditing firm. They hire a handful that audit like a big client like this. To make sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed.
Yep.
So that's what's kind of more further evidence that. Every bank has a compliance department. Like it's their job. Yes, you're going to get money laundering slipping through. I mean, with any bank. I mean, whatever bank you bank and I bank, I'm sure there's some money laundering going by.
Oh, of course. I use Chase.
Yeah, well, there you go. And anyway, so yeah. I mean, not only was I able to prove that, that this was all sort of created by Spanish secret police, but it's so ludicrous that these clients that they were accused of money laundering when there's all this verifiable data of all the top auditing firms, at least in the region, audited and like it went through all the compliance process before opening the account. Because they wouldn't even be allowed to open the account without this proper regulation to be covered, especially if you wanted to remain an above board bank. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. There was such a paper trail in every direction showing that how ludicrous the case to this day still is, that any money laundering was like happening. Again, I have to say it again. Yet you have HSBC and Deutsche Bank and all these banks that have laundered such an outrageous amount of money. Wasn't it HSBC where they had to like redesign the window so they could shove the briefcases through of cash? And what's so ironic about this on the side note is money, when you have a banking license, you have a license to launder money. It's simple as that. I don't care what you say, or anybody says, when you are a banker, if you run a big bank, part of your overhead, your money is laundering money. Yeah. And it's how do you get away with it? Because the fines that you get, if you launder $30 billion for whoever, and you only have to pay $4 billion in fines, just came out way ahead. You just smack on the wrist and yeah, off you go. And you find out how to launder again. Because the fine is always much less than how much profit you made. Not to mention, you're certainly not going to get a Section 311 issued against you. Imagine if a Section 311 got issued against HSBC for the Mexican cartel.
Oh, gosh.
How many people's accounts would have been frozen? What a nightmare that would have been.
It would have been catastrophic.
But it also goes to show that the Section 311 is frankly bullshit and is used as a weapon and is not being used at all for what it was designed to be used based on the legislation within the Patriot Act.
It's like the Magnitsky Act, but it basically labels you as a domestic terrorist or money launderer or trafficker, and then they can basically sanction you as the individual. They can freeze your visa, and then they can freeze all of your assets here in America. So our government uses these techniques to basically...
It's not even just America. Like, look what happened in Canada with the protests going on there with the truckers, and all of their accounts were frozen. So the point is, too, is that, which is kind of another tentacle to the story, is that if you're in the mainstream commercial financial banking system, you know, not only is the money not yours, but you can be turned off at any point. At any point.
And it has nothing to do with you, right? You didn't do anything wrong. You weren't attacking the government. You weren't trying to be a bad actor or nefarious actor. Let's talk a little bit. I got two people. I want to talk about Jennifer, and I want to talk about J.C. Flowers. So J.C. Flowers is the company that it seems like they came out ahead because they acquired this bank at pennies on the dollar. So how does J.C. Flowers fit into this?
So J.C. Flowers is kind of known, if anybody like looks into them, like they're known for kind of like a hedge fund where they just pick up the pieces of a failing business, they buy it at pennies on the dollar, and they grow it again. And so I don't have a direct line, and I failed miserably getting J.C. Flowers to talk to me, but you just have to kind of put two and two together on this one. Yep. When the head of Spanish secret police tells you that we're going to have America destroy your bank and we'll have an American company ready to buy what's left of it, and then J.C. Flowers pops on the scene shortly after and buys it, right? So I don't have any proof of the J.C. Flowers involvement other than you just look at their track record. What do? I did contact J.C. Flowers, and I told them what I was doing. And I can't remember exactly, but they said something like, "You're not asking the right questions." They really played games with me, like, because I was trying to be clever, and they were being more clever.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they basically, long story short, is I got tired of being given the runaround with them, but they were very cordial. They were very, very nice to me, and they responded quickly to me. But it was just like, I finally got to the point where I just said, I at what point in this timeline between BPA folding, if you would, with the Section 311, and you acquiring it, did you have any knowledge of the existence of BPA? That's what I asked finally. And that's when I hit a wall, because I finally asked a hard question. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that was basically when it went away. And they said that no. And then they also said, no, here, this is great. Then they finally ended it with, if you give us some information that would be of interest, of something to that effect, like basically they were saying, if you uncover the right stone and that we don't want you to uncover, we'll talk to you. And I even asked them if they wanted to see a copy of the movie when it was done, and they did. I never heard back. I never heard back. I sent it to everybody involved, because once it was like out. But J.C. Flowers was the only black hole that I couldn't get a door open. But come on, like their entire business model is buying failing businesses and buying them pennies on the dollar. So whether or not J.C. Flowers knew about it and was lined up, but J.C. Flowers, to their credit, maybe, who knows, maybe they were just approached because everybody knew J.C. Flowers would buy it. Once it was taken care of, maybe they had a short list. Yeah. J.C. Flowers is one of them, maybe, So in a way, J.C. Flowers is just doing their job. Like, they had no part of this conspiracy. That's what they do. They buy failing businesses and, and they made a huge profit off of it.
Did you look in to see if there was any other similar businesses that they bought up for pennies on the dollar after an incident like this, or the United States government was involved in, and they just came in to swoop up the pennies?
I didn't, but it's been a while since I've been in it because there were so many tentacles to this. I had to kind of allocate my time. Yeah. But I did follow up on some of the other banks that were hit with Section 311s, and it was a very similar scenario as this one. And almost everyone, the Section 311 was rescinded. It was pulled out.
It's bullshit.
It was because of, Yeah,
think about how many lives they destroyed and how, like the person that's laundering money, the cartel member, is he destroying more lives, or are these people that are in control of having that much power destroying more lives? How many people's lives got completely destroyed from the Andorra collapse? There was at least 1,000 clients that have money still in there today, right?
Yeah, I think I included some of this in the movie, but some people were suffering from cancer and they had health issues and they couldn't pay for their own medical bills because they had no access to their own money. It was devastating. So for the little guy, it was devastating. And for the big people that just stored it over there to try to not to keep it in their home country, like they probably didn't blink. I'm sure they're annoyed by losing the money, but yeah, the majority of the accounts were local Andorrans who banked at the local and BPA because it was only an Andorran-based bank.
But anybody that had less than 100,000, they basically released those funds right
Yeah,
away because they didn't want the masses pissed off, right?
Yeah, that is a part of it. They just went ahead and pleased, tried to, for
90%,
probably
99%.
PR reasons. Yeah, they just got, yeah.
Yeah, because the majority of the wealth was what they technically are now profiting for, benefiting from having access to billions.
Well, yeah, I
or
mean,
millions.
it's the big clients that make you the money. I mean, that's why if you remember, like some of these bankers, like they would fly to Russia and meet with Victor Knicken, if you remember.
Yeah, I saw that
like
part.
Santi did, and like you have like your own private banker when you have that much money involved, and that's where the money is the big boys. Yeah.
Wow. And then how does Jennifer Shanksky Calvary? How does she fit in? She was the head of.
It's just an interesting coincidence, and it's kind of ironic because I just thought it was interesting because I was looking at every tentacle I could within reason and put in the movie I thought was relevant. But if HSBC, she was head of compliance of HSBC, right? She's supposed to like prevent money laundering.
Yep.
Now we can verify this. I'm pretty sure she was head of compliance, but nonetheless,
I'll double check it.
she's HSBC, a major part of HSBC having to do with money laundering, some degree of, right? And right under her nose, they're laundering this many billions for the Mexican drug cartels. And then when that blows up in her face, she becomes the head of FinCEN. That's how she's rewarded for doing her job at HSBC. She becomes head of America's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Like, see what I'm saying? Like, this is just backwards. It makes no sense. And it also makes you kind of scratch your head and go, wow, since money laundering is so profitable, we might as well get one of the most talented people that understand how it works to run FinCEN, like under the guise of trying to prevent it, but when you know how profitable it can be. Do you know what I mean?
And what's FinCEN? What does that stand
The
for?
Financial Crimes Enforcement Network.
That's a U.S. government
It's a part of the U.S.
agency?
It's part of, FinCEN, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network.
And what is the difference between the FDIC, the SEC, and now FinCEN? It seems like we have three organizations that are kind of doing the same
Well,
thing.
FDIC, as you know, is like insurance, with your account. SEC has to do with stock exchange. But FinCEN has to do with moving money around. It's supposed to oversee like potential money laundering, terrorist funding, drug money, blah, blah, blah. Financial Crimes Enforcement Network.
Are these the people that are auditing every one of my $600 Venmo transactions, or is that the IRS?
I don't know if it's big enough for that. I don't know. I mean, maybe. I don't know. Yeah.
It's just crazy to me that we have all these three-letter agencies that it seems like they're never designed to protect the citizens, that they're always designed to protect the people that are stealing your gosh damn money.
Let's talk about this for a minute. Like, look at 2008. In a genuine capitalist free market society, those banks should have failed. And they couldn't let them fail. They had to bail them out because of the domino effect that would have occurred. It was slapped in the face of this so-called free market capitalism society we live in. Bullshit. It's bullshit. Yes, it is capitalism and it's free market technically, but not when it's too big. Like a great example, like when I did the Burzynski documentary, I hope this can fit in. I forgot about this. I got a chance to show it to David Axelrod, Obama's chief of staff. Not me personally, but David Axelrod's former college roommate was Burzynski's head of finance. And Burzynski, before things got really bad again for him, he was given permission by the FDA to start phase 3 trials for this a children's tumor style. I won't bore you with the details. Anyway, so right before I released it, his name is Gary, friends with Axelrod. He says, dude, where's your movie at? Because he'd seen the progress. He said, overnight me a DVD now, wherever state it's in. I'm meeting with Axelrod next week in DC for lunch. I haven't seen him in a while. He hands him the DVD, and a couple weeks later, Gary calls me back and he goes, but very sheepishly, and he's like, dude, Axelrod said, it's too big. This is just too big. It's just way too big. We can't face this right now. He said, great story, but can't touch this. So it has to do with the banks too. So what I'm saying is, when you're Chase or HSBC or one of these big boys, and you, of course you're going to have FinCEN in your back pocket. Of course you're going to have all of these groups in your back pocket. The regulatory agencies, while designed to protect the public, it seems great, but it's almost like, I mean, one guy, like think about it this way, like you have like 4 or 5 mob families, right? Why do you think the mob's been getting away with for so many generations? Because they have everybody in their back pocket. Like this is just a cleaner version of that. Like before you even think about laundering $40 billion for the Sinaloa drug cartel, you're going to have to make sure you got, your guys in the regulatory agencies, You know what I mean?
Oh, they're
Yeah.
operating at a level so high
Yeah, yeah,
above
yeah.
what we can even
But,
comprehend.
but they know it's so, they operate in such a large institution that if they were genuinely taken down for doing wrongdoing and people actually went to jail, the domino effect would be so devastating to the system.
Now,
I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying.
Oh,
yeah,
I agree.
yeah,
I agree
yeah,
with you 100%.
yeah.
It's like, you know, you look at what Jamie Dimon and the role that BlackRock and these people are playing in the Trump's administration and what they're doing as far as, you know, purchasing the Panama Canal. BlackRock's going to own, not the United States government, but a United States company is going to own the Panama Canal. And it's like, how are we going to take down BlackRock when they're playing such a monumental role in Trump's administration?
And they're a private company. So that's also interesting what's happening. That's a whole another tentacle to this too, is it's just sort of the evolution of not just America, but the world. I mean, privatizing as much as you can, insulating it from the government regulatory agents, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And yeah.
So last question would be, as far as, I'll be eventually working on a Bitcoin documentary, and so are you as well. But what is your takeaway as far as, you know, Bitcoin as a financial tool to prevent, you know, if you're giving advice to anybody that has over $1 million worth of wealth and they're sitting on some cash, they're thinking about maybe doing offshore banking.
Yeah.
What is your advice?
So when I did the Andorra Hustle, I actually originally wanted to, thinking that this was my chance to, because I've always been into, again, going back to my love for innovative technologies and disruptive technologies and being deep into studying Bitcoin specifically. I said, this is an opportunity to kind of tell both stories. Like if these people, let's take just the wealthy ones, not the small town person who just had 100 grand or less in there. But if you have some of these people like who had 5 million here or 10 million, 20 million there in BPA, just because they had so much money, they wanted, why not at the minimum put it in a stable coin and store it on a hardware wallet, like a Tether or a USDC? But if you have that much and you had half of an education on where Bitcoin has been and where it's going, put it in Bitcoin. Not only is it safe, stuck on a little hardware wallet. So my point is I wanted to basically make the case that if these people just put it into crypto instead of a bank, they wouldn't even be in this mess. So that's that was the point there. But I felt that trying to squeeze that into everything else the story offered would be too much. So I just literally put a screen at the end after the credits saying, boom, exactly kind of what I said, just like a one pager, you know? But yeah, I mean, considering how inconsistent, to be polite, the banking system is, and considering that how fragile it is, that's what I should say. The whole system is so fragile. Like, as soon as you make a deposit, I think most people watching this know, like if you put $100 in, 95 of it just went out the door. And it's being loaned and being, you know, it's being processed in all these different ways. That's why bank runs are so dangerous. When everybody rushes to get their money out and it's not all there because it's literally not all there. With crypto, you never have that problem. And as time goes by, there's going to be a point where you can basically use a Bitcoin transaction, in this case Bitcoin, for just about anything. It's just a matter of time before everybody has a Bitcoin wallet on their phone. You know, so it's like you can't even take gold. Like if you had even $1 million in gold, I think it'll cost you 125 grand just to move it. Not to mention the insurance. Like gold is just, it's so archaic. It's just silly. But we didn't, you didn't ask me about gold, but.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I'm with it. And it's crazy watching like the YouTubers back in like 2014 and then 2017 and 20. Can I live for a week off Bitcoin? And they go out into the world and they try to live, and you watch the older versions of it, and it's harder. And now it's like not even a thing. Like I don't even know if the video would get any views because it'd be so easy for me to live off Bitcoin. People would be like, oh, okay.
Now, I mean, you have the Lightning Network with Strike. I mean, you can pay your bills through Strike now. You can you don't even need a bank account anymore. I have friends who actually are doing that. They use Strike and other avenues, but Strike is the latest, like easiest one where their utility bills, their rent and everything, they just convert it from Bitcoin and the payment is wired into whatever vendor or whatever, person needs to be paid. They don't even have a bank account. Well, they do because,
Strike,
but they just don't, but they don't really use it,
Great, man. Well, I appreciate you coming out, brother.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This would be awesome.